Boris Johnson warns that ditching the Northern Ireland Protocol would be a great mistake.
Good morning. It's 6 o'clock on Sunday, the 19th of February. This is Breakfast on GB News with Angela Rippon and myself, Martin Dorbian. Here are your top stories this morning.
Boris Johnson is on a collision course with Downing Street over the Northern Ireland Protocol. In his first intervention since leaving Number 10, the former Prime Minister has issued a stark warning over plans to abandon the bill.
And the UK will support allies who have fighter jets ready to hand over to Ukraine. Speaking in Germany, Rishi Sunak says Kyiv has been failed by the West's security guarantees following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
In the race to replace Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and former Minister Ash Regan have become the first to announce that they will stand to take over as SNP leader and Scotland's First Minister.
And it's been nearly 2 weeks since the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. We'll be taking a look at how the two countries are managing in the aftermath and speaking with a British rescue team who have just returned home.
And as ever, of course, you can join in any of our discussions. You just email us to gbviews@gbnewsuk. We do love hearing from you, honestly. It means that we know that you're enjoying the programme and you're following all the big news stories that we're covering as well. It is your station, after all.
And they're awake. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Rishi Sunak's efforts to break the impasse over the Northern Ireland Protocol have been dealt a fresh blow by who other than, of course, Boris Johnson.
Yeah, he's back. The former Prime Minister says he's dropping the deal, which would empower the UK to unilaterally scrap parts of the treaty, would be a great mistake.
And his comments come after Mr Sunak, who's our current Prime Minister, of course, has said yesterday that a deal is by no means done.
Let's get some reaction to this now. Political commentator Dr John Coulter joins us now. So, John, here we go again, rearing his head from nowhere. He's back. Boris, rattling his sabre.
Yes, good morning, folks. This was a bit of another Boris bombshell here, because solving the protocol deal in Northern Ireland will guarantee the security of the peace process for, I would say, the next generation. Now, what Boris has done is really thrown a Trojan horse into the political negotiations here. Originally, the protocol was always seen as the European Union punishing the UK for daring to democratically vote to leave the European Union. So we've got to get a solution to the protocol. I suppose a side deal here, if we could use the term dealing here, is that getting this deal on the protocol by the Prime Minister is also about securing his future as Prime Minister. And also as well, don't rule out Boris Johnson comeback. And if there's one way that he can come back to Westminster as a big player again on the political scene, it is to throw this cat amongst the pigeons in terms of the deal. Because the big crisis would be that Rishi Sunak negotiates a deal, but it is not acceptable to the ERG in the Conservative Party, nor to the Democratic Unionist Party here in Northern Ireland. That it must meet the DUP's so-called 7 tests, which effectively secure the Union, secure Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom. So there's a lot to play for here. This is a very significant strategic move by Boris Johnson.
John, it's interesting. I was listening to a former ambassador, Irish ambassador to Great Britain, Daniel Mulhode, saying this morning that he thinks that Richie is actually going to get 80% of the deal that he wants. It's that niggly 20% that he's not going to be able to achieve. But just picking up on the point you're making there about opening the door for Boris to come back, of course, the protocol we have at the moment is the one that Johnson put in place himself. And there have been questions raised over Rishi Sunak's future as Prime Minister if he does not get this particular protocol changed through. Are you saying that you actually think that Boris Johnson is using this politically so that he can come back and walk back into number 10?
I have absolutely no doubt, having known Boris Johnson from my days writing for The Spectator magazine, I know that he may come across as the affable buffoon. He is, in effect, a very, very clever political strategist. So from that point of view, yes, the protocol has caused a lot of trouble, but if he is looking to get a foot in the door, quite literally, of 10 Downing Street, using the protocol as a battering ram against Rishi Sunak could be the way that he does it.
John, on the specifics of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, I know all about this for my sins, I'm quite anal retentive on this, but just to be clear for our viewers, this gives the United Kingdom the sword hand, as it were, to say, in the end of the day, no, we will not allow supremacy. Clause 20 in particular is the one that keeps the ECJ out of British control. That's the sticking point. And what Boris is saying, isn't he, correct me if I'm wrong, is dropping the bill gives the power back to Brussels. And if Rishi dares to drop the bill, he is basically simpering to Brussels. Is that right?
Yes, the big situation is this. We as a nation, by nation I use the word United Kingdom, we voted to leave the European Union. Brexit is a reality. It just seems that there are those in the European Union, and indeed some within the United Kingdom, who cannot accept that democratic vote. What will happen, just as you saw the gridlock there, what will happen is...
It was broken.
It was.
This bill will ensure that we become a sovereign nation once again. And we're not in a situation where England, Scotland and Wales enjoy the benefits of Brexit, but we in Northern Ireland are left behind as second-class citizens. That is why this bill in Westminster is so vital. And it's really important as well, and I cannot stress this enough, if Rishi Sunak gets this wrong and the deal is not acceptable to the DUP, Stormont will collapse and we could end up in a very dangerous, unstable position. You only need to look, and the photograph you've got up at the minute is the leaders of Sinn Féin, and we mustn't forget that Sinn Féin is the political mouthpiece of the Provisional IRA. They love the protocol. So it doesn't stand to reason, or it stands to reason that you don't need a PhD in politics to work out that if the IRA's political wing love the protocol, then it's danger to Northern Ireland, the Union, and the breakup of the United Kingdom.
But it also means, of course, that if we don't get some sort of settlement, Northern Ireland goes for another year at least without any proper kind of government from Stormont. Whatever is happening commercially with regards to the protocol, the nation itself is suffering because what is happening to the NHS there, to education there, to all sorts of other aspects of Irish life. They've got to find a solution, John, haven't they?
Yes, a solution needs to be found, but there is another solution, Angela, that can help the people here in Northern Ireland in terms of the cost of living crisis. Don't forget, the Northern Ireland Secretary of State, Chris Heaton-Harris, was able to bring in emergency legislation which extended the deadline as to when Assembly elections could take place. So, worst case scenario, the deal doesn't work, the DUP don't accept it, they don't want into Stormont. It's not without the possibility, technically, that Chris Heaton-Harris could bring forward legislation at Westminster which would allow the Assembly to be up and running for those parties which want to work the Assembly. Because we badly need an Assembly back again to deal with the cost of living crisis here in Northern Ireland. So basically, there is this, what you might call, opt-out clause, that even if we have a protocol deal that doesn't satisfy the DUP, Westminster can still step in and give us a government here. What we don't want happening is that we don't have a government at Stormont and we go back to the bad old days of direct rule, because that might bring in, shall we say, Dublin poking its nose into the affairs of Northern Ireland. We don't want that.
John, I think you've made it very clear where your political ambitions lie. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I really got the impression there that John was sitting on the fence.
Yeah.
Anyhow, let's move on to our next story.
No. It's good to have somebody saying precisely what they think in this situation, because I think, everybody is muddying the waters here.
Yeah.
And there is no clear path through at the moment. And that's what Northern Ireland desperately needs.
But it does feel like Brexit Groundhog Day. In many ways, we are exactly where we were in 2019 in October. Anyhow, next story, as I said, the Prime Minister has told Western leaders the UK stands ready to support all allies if they can provide fighter jets to Ukraine now.
Speaking at the Munich Security Conference yesterday, Rishi Sunak once again repeated calls to double down on support for that war-torn nation.
Now is the time to double down on the support that we provide Ukraine. I've been having meetings with leaders from the United States and across Europe, and we are united in our determination to ensure Ukraine succeeds and that Russia fails. And I want everyone to follow our lead in giving Ukraine that support. But not only do we need to help them win the war, we also need to ensure a lasting peace. And that's something that I've also been talking to allies about today. We're at a pivotal moment in this conflict where if we provide Ukraine with the extra means that they need, then they can turn the tide and liberate their country. We will happily provide assistance to any country that is able to provide Ukraine with fighter jets right now. The UK stands ready to support those countries as well. For our part, we're also leading the world in training Ukrainian pilots on NATO standard aircraft. That's the right thing to do, because this is about giving Ukraine the means to defend themselves and win this war. That's about more air defence, it's about armoured vehicles, it's about long-range weapons. The UK is out in front in all of these things, and it's important that we continue to do so and lead, because we all want to see Ukraine succeed.
Well, fighting talk there from Richie. And let's now speak to our political commentator with Young Voices UK, and that's Portia Berry-Kilby. Good morning to you, Portia. Good morning. Now, listening to that, I mean, that is fighting talk from Richie there, but what sort of reaction and support is he getting, do you think, from the other European leaders that were at that conference? Are they just as gung-ho about this as he is?
Well, I think they are, but at the same time, the UK has been leading to some extent since Boris Johnson's very much zealous commitment to supporting Ukraine and the things that they need there. But I think what's particularly interesting is that he has called for European leaders to come together, double down, especially insofar as provision of fighter jets. And naturally, this is necessary because it's not simply the case of one country giving a jet over. Often the fighter jets aren't solely sovereign, so you do need other countries in support of providing them for those to be given. But of course, this is a long-term strategy, and you can't just drop off a plane and then expect things to be fine. The training of pilots, the maintenance of the jets themselves means that nothing will be happening anytime too soon with that. But the other tactics that are needed to support Ukraine are more important.
Yeah, Portia, I think that's a key point that you brought up there. £2.1 billion has already been given last year. Talks of doubling down sound very expensive. And these jets cannot be deployed straight away, can they? This is more about the longer-term strategic protection of Ukraine. And in that case, it's actually the UK taking a more long-term and active role in security. And how will that go down, do you think, with Mr. Putin?
Well, this is the real problem, isn't it? And as soon as the UK mentions the prospect of fighter jets, it's like, well, what extent are you actually not active in this war? The same for every European nation, right? They don't want to be actively involved, but the distinction between supporting and then actively supporting is, of course, becoming blurred. So those things, it's a diplomatic nightmare, of course, but at the same time, the UK's vocal support of Ukraine has been there. The financial backing has been there. It's no surprise what side of the party they fall on. And I think it's only fair for Rishi Sunak to then say, put your money where the mouth is. If you want Ukraine to win, then why aren't you financially supporting them to do that?
It was interesting. I heard one of the Ukrainian generals saying he was asked how long he thinks the war is likely to go on. And he was talking in terms of us still being there this time next year. And what is quite interesting that Bob Seeley, who's the MP for the Isle of Wight, former soldier, was saying today it is just not realistic that we can expect Ukraine to survive without help. So this is going to be for the long term, isn't it?
Entirely. And of course, the UK is sending Challenger 2 tanks over at the end of March. This is still 6 weeks away. The war isn't going to be over in those 6 weeks. There has to be a longer term strategy. And the hope is that Ukraine can reclaim some of the land that it's lost. There's no kind of expectation that the war will be deemed over before that happens. Ukraine are going to go down fighting. So if they're not going to be able to not only hold Russia back, but also make progress to returning to the state they were in, then the war will be dragged out further and further. I think the general consensus is that if you want the war to end, it's better to happen sooner than later. And of course, that needs the support now. It can't be given. You need the commitment to the long-term support now. You can't give it in like a year's time, because these things, as already said, take time. It takes working out So at least Rishi Sunak has been vocal already, and the other states were. The US, of course, even said that they deem Russia to be guilty of crimes against humanity. So if that's not enough to kind of rally European leaders to do more, then I don't really know what is.
I think this is very clever strategy, because at first it was helmets, then it was tanks, now it's jets. I mean, how long maybe before we have peacekeeping troops? But of course, all of these things early on in the conflict would have been seen as very provocative acts. But this slower creep towards involvement, it's canny strategy, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's always, the response is it's not the UK or Europeans that are escalating this, it's the Russians, and this is therefore a proportionate response. And I think that's important, that it isn't seen that the UK is escalating things by sending in tanks or jets straight away, but it's in response to continued aggression from Russia.
But it is a very fine line, isn't it, between us supporting them and actually sending our own troops there. And I'm sure that NATO, all those NATO countries that are bordering the Ukraine, are very, very aware of that. But I wonder, Portia, you represent Young Voice UK. How anxious are young people that this is a war that is just going to continue, and that before we know it, we're all going to be dragged into it one way and another, not just providing armaments, but actually having to step over the line and take a physical part in this war?
Well, I think that's a very different question from where we are now. And I think the reality of it is, for better or for worse, there isn't exactly appetite for full-out war amongst the British public, let alone Britain's young people. I think ask anyone and they're not going to say, oh, sure, I'll go and fight. And we're seeing in the army we have fewer soldiers than most years in recent history. So these things all are going to be a huge calculation. And there's obviously a massive escalation if we're talking about sending troops to Ukraine. And we've had Ben Wallace say over the past few days that we also need to focus on UK military and defence here at home. And the war in Ukraine has highlighted UK's vulnerabilities, and there needs to be more efforts from both the Prime Minister and the Treasury that the UK defence is in the position it should be.
Portia, thank you very much indeed for that. Thanks for joining us. I think we'll be talking to you also a bit later in the programme today. Yeah,
and it's also a fascinating re-emergence of former allies, reaching out to Poland, USA to take a lead on this. So in many ways, I think it's a very clever strategy. Yeah. Anyhow.
We're going to bring you up to date now with what else is going on today in the news. And France's president says that he wants to see Russia defeated in Ukraine, but not crushed. Emmanuel Macron says that the West should not aim for a total defeat of Moscow on its own soil. His comment has sparked criticism from some other NATO allies, saying he is delivering a mixed message.
And former US President Jimmy Carter is receiving hospice care at his home in Georgia. A statement from the Carter Center says the 98-year-old made the decision after a series of hospital stays, saying he wants to spend his remaining time at home with his family.
What a very dignified response that
is.
An anthem written by composer Andrew Lloyd Webber is one of 12 new pieces of music that's going to be played for King Charles at his coronation in May. King Charles has requested Greek Orthodox music as well to be played in tribute to his late father. Lloyd Webber, best known for musicals including Evita and Jesus Christ Superstars, among others, said he was incredibly honoured to have been asked.
It's a nice smorgasbord of music, I think, that. And
it is.
Very multicultural. It reflects modern Britain.
And we're going to listen to some of it right at the very end of the programme. So I think we're going to have a feast of music.
Are you going to sing along, do you think?
Well, me sing along with Zadok the priest. Yes, we can do that, I think.
Wow, now that is something worth sticking around for. Angela Rippon singing in the morning, a morning serenade like a lark. That's worth the wait. Anyway, plenty more to come this morning. After the break, we'll be looking at the situation, the latest situation on the Turkey-Syria earthquake. But first, here's your morning weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell, and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, as we look ahead to the next few days, we'll see some further rain in the north, but the south generally remaining largely dry and feeling mild until we get to Wednesday. So here's the situation for Sunday. We've got an area of high pressure keeping things settled in the south, but this area of low pressure towards the northwest will bring some rain, especially across Scotland as the day goes on. We can see that rain already across the west of Scotland. That will spread its way eastwards during the course of the day, Also allowing a lot of cloud to come into Northern Ireland and Northern England. Can't rule out the odd split and spot of rain, especially across the high ground. Maybe even the far north of Wales seeing the odd splash of rain. But for the rest of England and Wales, it's a dry day. Some good amounts of sunshine, especially down towards southwest England and central southern England. And here temperatures will reach 14 or 15 degrees. A milder day then of late also for the north, but that will be tempered somewhat by a keen wind, which will only strengthen further as we go through the course of the evening and overnight. Quite a wet and windy night to come across the far north of Scotland. That rain will transfer its way southwards as we go through the course of the night. We'll end up around the central belt as we start Monday morning. But as you can see, a mild night for all of us, really. So we will certainly start the new working week on that mild note. But for Glasgow and Edinburgh, could be quite a slow commute as that rain comes through. It will transfer its way further southwards as we go through the course of the day. So it may well cheer up across the far north of Scotland, but feeling a little bit chillier here. To the south of it, mild but rather cloudy. Any sunshine will be very limited as we go through the course of the afternoon. But temperatures still reaching 13, possibly 14 degrees in a few spots. Tuesday will then be very similar. We see another mild day, but a good deal of cloud with the rain generally focused across the north. Then Wednesday turns colder for us all with the risk of some wintry showers, especially across the north, and then that will continue as we go into Thursday.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It is so good to have your company this time of the morning, which is, what now, 23 minutes past 6? Yes. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Angela and Martin. Well, it's been 2 weeks since the mega earthquake that devastated large swathes of Turkey and Syria.
Yeah, against incredible odds, rescue teams continue to perform miracles and are still pulling people out alive from the rubble, but that number is quickly diminishing.
Turkish journalist Melda Dawa has been on the ground since the very first day. She joins us now. A very good morning to you, Melda. I know that you are actually on the border. Just tell us what the situation is there at the moment, because I think there is growing anger about the way in which the two governments have actually been dealing with this crisis.
Well, yes, I'm in Nurdağ now. It's on Turkey's south. This is one of the worst affected regions in Turkey by the earthquake. You can see behind me, people now are living in tents. It's quite cold here. Aid has arrived late and was very disorganized. There's a lot of anger in Turkish public actually regarding how the government has handled this situation, the earthquake that had the 10 cities and affected 13.5 million people. I would say the main reason is actually three main factors here. First, how the emergency situation was badly handled, and some regions have and rescue workers have reached some regions very, very late. The second thing that the public is very angry is actually why we weren't prepared for this earthquake. Turkey is in the earthquake region. It was known that this country would sooner or later face an earthquake. They have been collecting earthquake taxes for years, actually over 20 years. $36.5 billion of earthquake taxes were collected, but yet precautions weren't taken. And even though the laws existed regarding the code for building and construction existed, it was barely applied anywhere. And this is the reason why actually, due to corruption and due to lack of enforcement, that many buildings were improperly built, and that cost lives of thousands of people.
So, Melda, the search for survivors obviously is continuing. In fact, later in the show, we have a wonderful pair of sniffer dogs and the team that come out from the UK to help. But it's starting to approach the end of the envelope now, isn't it? And can you give us an idea of the climate in Turkey? Because many British viewers think of Turkey as a hot country, of course, but you have very perishingly cold winters down there, don't you? And that goes against the odds of people surviving in the rubble, doesn't it?
And indeed, you're nicely warm. Yeah. I think they're in a lovely sort of quilted jacket, which just proves the point.
It's so cold. Honestly, it's about -degrees in the night, and even during the day, it's very cold. And on top of this, like in this camp, which is like next to, it's in a park in the town center where I'm located now. So there's a lot of dust also around, coming out of the rubble. So it's hard to breathe. And tent conditions, of course, there's the hygiene point of view, lack of toilets, and running water is also like an issue at the moment. Hygiene has become a very important topic at this point, because people risk also getting infected from diseases due to lack of sanitary conditions.
Melda, we're hearing reports that many of the survivors from Turkey are now crossing over the border into Syria. Now, we know that Syria was very, very badly affected by this. And again, the government of Assad was doing very little to help people there. But they must be facing desperate measures if they feel that it's better to cross over the border and go into Syria rather than stay in Turkey.
Yes. So this area, Hatay area, has a very high population of immigrants, because it's just next to the border, right? About 40% of Hatay's population actually was made of immigrants. So all these people now they are trying to cross the border to reunite with their family members who are living in villages across the border. The main reason I would say here is more people want to reunite with their families, see if everyone is okay, maybe going to help them there. So there is lines of thousands of people also waiting at the border to cross back to Syria.
It is 13 days since the quake, and an awful lot of the international teams are now pulling out. Does this suggest that, sadly, all hope is now being given up for finding any survivors, even though I think yesterday someone was pulled from the rubble?
Well, yes, yesterday, after 278 hours, 3 people were saved under the rubble. So it's a total miracle. Like, if you would have seen the rubbles, the buildings we witnessed here, you would never think that anyone could come alive out of these buildings, but miracles happen. Unfortunately, yes, rescue efforts have been finished in several areas. They're now continuing just only in Hatay, in Osmaniye, and in Adıyaman. They're still going on, but in most of the regions, the rescue efforts have finished, and the foreign teams are also going back to their countries. 88 countries helped Turkey during this earthquake. 23 of those rescue teams, foreign rescue teams, have left the country as of today, and the others are expected to leave the country in the coming 2 or 3 days.
Melda, thank you very much indeed for joining us there from the border. Stay safe yourself, but thank you for that report. Thank you.
Yeah, very thought-provoking and moving report.
Very much
Thanks.
so.
OK, more to come, including a look through today's papers with Candice Holdsworth after the break. Please stick with us.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
And welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with myself, Martin, and Angela Rippon.
So let's take a look at today's front pages, and we start with The Observer, which leads with Johnson threatens Sunak's bid to end the deadlock over Brexit.
And here's the Independent's front page. The sick children left to suffer as wait for care on the NHS soars.
Now, The Sun on Sunday goes with Andrew evicted from £30 million mansion.
I'm a royal, get me out of here. Well, he's not a royal, is he? And the Daily Star reports on the rise of alien-related work absences. Ye gods.
Well, it's time for us to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning is the deputy editor of... Well, he's going to join us later.
He's overslept.
He's overslept.
He's in trouble.
Yeah, but he'll be with us a bit later on. But I'm delighted to say that, come on, girl power here.
Yeah,
Candice Holdsworth has made it on time. Candice, welcome.
Not all heroes wear capes. Not all heroes wear capes, but here you are, you've made it in. Good. Now, there's tons and tons to go at this morning, and you've picked a really interesting story. Front page of the Sunday Mail. I don't know if we have that on screen, but we have it there. And that's the Battle of the Bill. This is about the leadership race north of the border to replace Nicola Sturgeon, and a clear battle line has broken out early doors. Talk us through it.
Yes, so this is front page of the Sunday Mail, which is part of the Scottish Daily Record. This is about basically the two candidates to replace Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister of Scotland.
We should say who they are.
Yes, it is Humza Yousaf and Ash Regan. And they both take very different positions on the controversial gender recognition bill, which a lot of people are attributing as to why Nicola Sturgeon had to step down early. Interestingly enough, Ash Regan, she actually stepped down as her position of Minister for Community and Safety over this bill because she believed it represented a threat to women's safety, so she said she'll rip it up. The other candidate, Yousaf, he wants to continue on with it, and he actually believes that Westminster vetoing it was an overreach. So this is a very interesting thing that we're going to see. Is it going to be something that's defining? Do people want a clear break with it, or will they want to continue on with it? I'm wondering how the other MSPs will feel about that issue.
But interestingly, the majority of people in Scotland do not want the bill.
They don't. She is very in touch with how people are feeling. And so I think that that's a bit foolish for Yousaf to push with it, because I think most people in Scotland who are quite conservative about this issue don't want it to go forward.
And it's very, very interesting because later on we're going to be cutting to the Scottish Labour conference, which is happening today. Keir Starmer's giving a keynote speech later on today, I think at midday. And this should be a key issue because the Scottish Labour leader takes the same position as Yousaf. He supports the gender recognition bill.
As does Sir Keir.
Correct. So this, I think, is a story that runs all throughout the United Kingdom. Will this, I believe, just some people might say this is a toxic bill. We're being told to be balanced. And it is, I think, a clear political fault line. And another thing that's interesting, Kate Forbes, who's also in the running for this, is being attacked because she's a Christian.
Yes, it's very interesting. So people are saying that with Nicola Sturgeon stepping down, possibly a decline in fortunes for the SNP, Labour are going to be the beneficiaries of this. So I think we do need to scrutinise their position on this particular bill and how they feel about it, and also Keir Starmer, who's also very ahead in the polls now, election coming up in 2 years. We need to be looking at what their positions are, because I don't think it's popular with the general British public. Kate Forbes as well, also meant to be a brilliant person, excellent. Sadly, people think that being a Christian, that will count against her. And I think that that's wrong, because I think we should have a pluralistic society where we can accept all different points of view. And if someone is competent, they should be able to get the role.
Yeah, and the sadness is, not the sadness, but I mean, this is a Scottish paper, isn't it? So that not necessarily everybody in the rest of Great Britain is going to be able to see that story.
Yes.
But you're both quite right. I think this is going to be a focal point of so much political debate over the next several weeks.
And actually, I think not just in the UK, but I think globally, this is being looked at as a real moment in this kind of trans conversation, women's safety, women's rights. How principled is it to have resigned over this issue? I think that's a commendable thing to do. And how can we be in a position in 2023 where being a Christian is an attack point, a weakness in a country with strong sort of Presbyterian or Christian links? It's almost sometimes like the world has flipped on its head. Definitely one to watch.
Yes,
Candice,
sure.
I don't know if you'd like to comment on the front page of the Sunday Express. Forces too broken to defend the UK. I mean, we have been talking, of course, this morning about the reaction to what Rishi Sunak has been saying at the conference in Europe about the way in which everybody's got to kind of double down on what they're doing and support the whole of what is happening in Ukraine. But as several people are pointing out, it is depleting what we have to defend us here at home.
This is what people have been pointing out. And also, apparently, the American military has criticised the British armed forces and saying that they've been weakened considerably. They need to look at it. And I know that Ben Wallace has been pushing for quite some time now to get more funding. And it is so true. If we're thinking about donating tanks, missiles, whatever else to Ukraine, we also need to look at what we have to protect ourselves, because obviously protection of England is the first Great Britain is the first priority.
Yeah, and interestingly, earlier this week we covered this. France is now a superior NATO power. And I've mentioned it every day. I'm sorry to go on about it, but it somewhat sticks in the craw to think that our kind of Francophile...
It is a bigger country. But we have got submarines.
Yeah. Well, there is that. We can always.
No, Germany hasn't got submarines because it's landlocked.
That's right. Well, they did
Used to have. They did in World War II, but they haven't now.
They've got to do it up periscope onto Macron, I guess. But the fact of the matter is, I think it does bring a big conversation around about where should we spend our money. As I keep saying, 2.1 billion quid to Ukraine in 2022 alone. Our talks of doubling down. Do you think we should be putting more and more money in, or does safety begin at home?
Well, priority of your country, I mean, that comes first, absolutely, especially in a world that's becoming a little bit more unstable and there are threats possibly coming from China, although obviously not concrete threats, but people are talking about a more adversarial relationship with China. And Britain has historically always had a very strong navy, and that's been very advantageous for us. So we do need to focus on that. Absolutely. I think support for Ukraine is important, but obviously our own welfare comes first.
You picked up on the the story on the front of the Mail on Sunday that Prince Andrew fears he's going to lose his £30 million home.
Yes, I think a lot of people are thinking play the world's smallest violin.
Yeah.
So this is front page of the Mail on Sunday. Apparently, Prince Andrew is quite upset that his brother may be withdrawing a grant for his home, the Royal Lodge, which is on the grounds of Windsor. This is all part of Prince Charles's slimmed-down monarchy, so I don't think it comes...
Charles.
King Charles? Oh, my gosh.
Don't
I know, we've all got to get used to it.
I can't get used to it. It's just like... Okay.
I still sing God Save the Queen. It's just so far in me.
Yes, over time, yeah. So King Charles, this is not a surprise. He's been saying this for a long time. Apparently, he's also said that his brother does have a sizable inheritance from their late parents, so he can cover his own costs and he won't be giving him any more money from the Duchy of Lancaster.
Interesting. Now, again, was it yesterday we were talking about the hiring of PR teams?
Yes.
To kind of reinvent Catherine getting a team, and we should need one. She's doing a fantastic job with that PR advisors. But Andrew was talking about hiring a team to improve his image. Why can't these people just go and play golf?
No, that's a lost cause. I don't think he's ever going to improve his image. I mean, unless some miracle comes out of somewhere that proves his absolute innocence, I think it's so true, I think he needs to withdraw.
And he's not actually part of what's being called the Magnificent Seven, the working royals, which are the King, Camilla, William, Kate, Sophie, and Edward, and of course the magnificent Princess Anne.
You got them all right.
I got them all right. Yeah. he's not part of that group of working royals anymore. And there is a very sort of sharp distinction which says that the public purse will only support those who are working members of the royal family. The rest of them don't actually have any entitlement to government or public money unless the king himself decides he's going to give Andrew a personal benefit.
Yeah.
But it's not likely to happen, is it?
No.
Well, the public appetite for an Andrew return, sure, it's not there.
No.
So, I mean, he seems to be, once again, deluded and removed from reality.
Yes.
I think we, both of us, Martin, were interested in this story, threats to a television channel, Iran International. And as a journalist, Candice, yourself, I find this very disturbing, this story.
Yes. I mean, if we're going to stand up for freedom for other parts of the world, we should absolutely be standing up for countries that are fighting for their rights for freedom of expression and free speech. And I find it quite sinister that these forces can reach so far, and they can even reach into London, where we are trying to protect these values. And I feel so sorry for the people of Iran who are trying so hard. I mean, all these young people are standing up for their rights, and it's just being quashed like this.
And this is another international conversation about women's rights, of course, what broke out in Iran. So much bravery, and there are still thousands of political prisoners out there.
Yeah.
And the reason they want to shut them down on our soil is because they're speaking the truth to power, and they don't like it Upham. No. But to come over here and to perform an act of hostility on our soil, surely is getting into the realms of an international act of aggression? Or...
Well, the security forces, I understand, have said that they have already stopped 15 attempts at either murder or capture here in this country on the journalists who work for this particular station, which is why they're now having to go to their office in Washington to continue. And I think they have something like 30 million people worldwide that watch this particular channel to find out what is happening in Iran, because nothing, of course, is coming from the official state-controlled media.
Yes.
Wow. And we should feel justifiably proud, actually. I know you defend freedom of speech, you're fiercely passionate about that. We should feel justifiably proud that we become a safe place for people to come and broadcast this. But then if they're coming over like this, 15 attempts, that's astonishing.
15 attempts at kidnap. Yes.
That's a disgrace.
That is astonishing.
Isn't it? And they've foiled them.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm actually blown away by that.
Yeah. Well, again, I suppose it's the security services working as they do, undercover, and they've managed to foil those particular attempts. But it's got to the point where apparently the journalists are finding that it's their families at home in Iran that are now being threatened as well. And so they're moving, they're going to Washington. And as I say, I think we should take credit for having supported them, as indeed they do. They give great credit to the British security forces for having supported them and saved them so far. But, you know, as journalists, we want that freedom of speech, and we know that the public should have a right to hearing what is happening in the world.
Hear to that, which brings us quite neatly on to the next choice here. This is a story we looked at yesterday a little bit, and that is Katie Price's son Harvey, who of course is disabled, has become a target of sick memes online. The cops are getting involved. Now, is this a free speech issue? Should the police be involved? Or is it just bad taste? Where do you sit on that?
OK, yes, so both. I'm glad you raised both, because those are two strands that I want to explore. So, yeah, this is the story on the front page of the Sunday Mirror. Apparently, Katie Price has found out that some Met police officers have created a WhatsApp group purely to mock her son, Harvey, which I think is so disgraceful and so distasteful. She wants criminal investigations. I'm not sure it rises to that level. Free speech, people should be allowed to mock and say belittling things. But if they have breached professional conduct, then I think that they can be investigated for that, because I think there are sometimes just instances in which you should not be doing these things. Not saying that you should go to jail for it, but I mean, you look at the case of Bieber Henry and Nicholas Smallman, when they were sharing pictures of those poor murdered sisters, and they lost their jobs, and they were sent to jail, because obviously I do believe in free speech, but I also believe in free speech within the law.
But why are the police doing that? This is what I find quite difficult to come to terms with. These are members of a force in this country who are supposed to be protecting our rights and our freedoms, and they set up a WhatsApp group to mock a young disabled boy. What is going on in their heads?
It's hard to know. I mean, the Met is so stuck in a quagmire of allegations and proven mistakes. Why would they just go near this? I mean, it just seems to be an absolute lack of common sense. And I'm all for free speech, but when the police are doing it, and when their reputation is already in tatters, I think people deserve to get the chomp for that person. I do.
Candice, you've done a great job for us this morning, I think.
Great job, absolutely fantastic.
Fraser, if you're now up and watching the telly...
Go home.
No. We need you in here, Fraser, so do come and join us. Candice, thanks very much indeed for that. Thanks so much.
OK. Well, let's bring you up to date now with what's going on in the big stories today.
Boris Johnson has warned Rishi Sunak that dropping the Northern Ireland Protocol bill would be a great mistake. Now, the agreement was set in motion when Mr Johnson himself was the Prime Minister. But government says a successful outcome of recent talks would mean that the Protocol bill would no longer be needed.
And Scottish Health Secretary just discussed there, Humza Yousaf and former Minister Ash Regan have become the first to announce they're running to replace Nicola Sturgeon as the SNP's leader. Other candidates tipped to stand for election are Finance Minister Kate Forbes, as we just discussed in the paper review, and also Deputy Leader Keith Brown.
An Iranian TV channel based in the UK says that it's been forced to move to the United States over safety fears for its journalists. Iran International TV say it's reluctantly closed its West London studios, but staff refused to be silenced by threats from Tehran. The government responded by condemning the lack of respect for basic rights from the Iranian regime. Now we're popping down to my part of the country here, to the southwest, because we're going to the small Cornish town of Lostwithiel. And when the people there found that their local surgery was about to struggle, well, indeed, they were struggling to recruit a new GP, they took matters into their own hands. And in a rather interesting way, they made a recruitment musical video.
Yeah, we saw this before we came on the show. It's absolutely going to warm your cockles. GB News reporter Jeff Moody went to find out whether it worked.
We've got a surgery that's needing you. We've got money if you want brass. We've lots of pills.
The people of Lostwithiel are proud of their GP surgery, and it's easy to see why.
The atmosphere here is lovely. It's a really nice, happy, friendly place to work. Everybody's really supportive, and it's probably the nicest place that I've worked.
It's been absolutely first class. The idea that you can have a problem in the morning and get a response from the doctors, at least in the afternoon, is a bit unique from what I'm being told. We certainly wouldn't want to lose that.
Lostwithiel medical practice is superb. So much so that it's been voted the top practice in Cornwall and the 24th in the country. Now that is some achievement for a start.
But all that's under threat. One of the practice's 2 GPs is retiring at the end of March, and despite advertising far and wide, the Cornish town has had no interest whatsoever.
There's national shortages, we know that. Every advert looks the same in a journal, and Lostwithiel's not going to stand out. They all say they're the best at this and the best at that, but actually we are the best practice in Cornwall. We're outstanding with CQC, so we should stand out, but we don't. So I just think there's too many vacancies.
And so the community got together to create their own job advert in song.
It was so easy to get people involved. Nobody, absolutely nobody said no. We got some of the community groups involved, and then for the last shot, the big one, we had a cherry picker on the field behind me, and we just did a big shout out to the town. I reckon we had about 500 people in that film in the end. I mean, Emma wrote the lyrics. We had somebody else who's a great musician in town do the backing track. We had another person from the town do the sound engineering, and a lovely Cornish filmmaker put it together. So really it is a whole community effort.
And it's paying off. The video has sparked interest from across the globe. They've had media responses from Germany and New York. And already GPs are trekking down to Cornwall for a look around. It won't be long, they hope, before Lostwithiel has its full complement of GPs once again. Jeff Moody, GB News.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love that. I tell you, what a way to get a new GP. Yeah. I know Cornwall very well because I was born in Plymouth. The West Country is my home part of the world, and I can't believe that a GP would not be tempted to go and work for the population of Lostwithiel. You know, they're in the middle of Cornwall. You've got all those wonderful beaches. Yeah. You've got the opportunity to go sailing. They've got quite good weather down there too.
Is it anything like Dr. Martin, the TV show? That...
Well, no, look, because Lostwithiel isn't on the coast. Yeah. But it's, I mean, you know, if the local community have gone to those extremes to try and persuade someone to come and work with them, my goodness, what a fabulous community wherever the GP is going to be going into.
Yeah, and because I have the curse of coming from a newspaper tabloid background, I thought I'd go for a few songs I think they should sing. Yeah. What about Staying Alive by the Bee Gees?
Yes.
That'd be quite a good one. Bad Medicine, Bon Jovi.
Oh, well done.
Doctor Doctor by the Thompson Twins.
Yeah, oh, gosh, you've been thinking about this, haven't you?
But don't sing Another One Bites the Dust by Queen. That might put people off. It would. But I think it's a wonderful idea. And
it's fabulous.
If you want to stand out in any job interview, make yourself have a USP, and they've done it with aplomb.
But don't you, and the entire community has got involved. I think it's fabulous. Oh, whoever gets that job, they're going to have fun with that community, aren't they? They really are.
Send in your views on that. Maybe you've got some terribly punny song names you could send in, but we've had loads of views in already, Andrew, which is great. Shows people are watching and they're awake. What have we got coming through this morning?
We've got the Northern Ireland Protocol. I think this is Brian from Spalding. He said, I think we all know that we all know about Boris, and whatever he's saying on Brexit will be to benefit Boris and not Britain. If Boris was 100% committed to leaving, he would have sorted the protocol out years ago by triggering Article 16. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure it's important.
Article 16 was the nuclear option of just sort of saying, no, we're out of all the negotiations. And, you know, a lot of people may have felt that was a good way to go, but it would probably precipitate a trade war. On the subject of Ukraine, Mike from Southall, very interesting point. Southall, just down the road from where my dad lives. Good morning, Angela and Martin. Sunak is saddling future generations of this country with massive debt unless Ukraine pays for all the weapons. Well, that's unlikely, isn't it?
Well, someone does have to pay for it, doesn't they? Yeah. SNP race. Christine says people may well hold religion against SNP candidates as it can impact on massively important decisions such as euthanasia. It's high time all potential MPs MSPs should be required to declare their religion. It was a small number of MPs with religious affiliation that held sway over the last euthanasia bill.
Very interesting point, how faith has suddenly become entracted with all of these debates,
Yeah.
Prince Andrew, we were quite scathing of him in the newspaper review earlier with Candice, but here's somebody who supports him. Yeah. Andrew, it's not you, is it? It's not actually Prince Andrew. No, Andrew says, I wish they would leave Andrew alone. He was never convicted of a crime, which is true.
Which is true.
He served in the Navy in the Falklands. As far as I can tell, he had...
He had sex with a girl who was within the age of consent, and actually that is true.
Yeah, so, you know, there you go, the jury is still out, even though we were harsh.
Yeah.
John, though, is a bit less sympathetic. How many millions does this man need? Sure, the Queen would have left him several millions already.
Yeah, well, he has got a fair bit of money, I think, in the bank, hasn't he? Yes. Yeah. What else? Oh, yes. On Ukraine, Greg from Sussex says, liked your question to the youth member regarding the war in Ukraine. I note she stated that the youth don't see a desire to go to war. I feel this is a true representation of youth today, always thinking it's someone else's issue, plus it shows their lack of care for their country. Not sure that it does, but no, it was an interesting point of view. Yeah.
OK, loads more to come, but more to come, including all the latest on the Rishi Sunak speech on Ukraine yesterday, and that's all coming after the weather.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell, and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, as we look ahead to the next few days, we'll see some further rain in the north, but the south generally remaining largely dry and feeling mild until we get to Wednesday. So here's the situation for Sunday. We've got an area of high pressure keeping things settled in the south, but this area of low pressure towards the northwest will bring some rain, especially across Scotland as the day goes on. We can see that rain already across the west of Scotland. That will spread its way eastwards during the course of the day. Also allowing a lot of cloud to come into Northern Ireland and Northern England. Can't rule out the odd split and spot of rain, especially across the high ground. Maybe even the far north of Wales seeing the odd splash of rain. But for the rest of England and Wales, it's a dry day. Some good amounts of sunshine, especially down towards southwest England and central southern England. And here temperatures will reach 14 or 15 degrees. A milder day then of late also for the north, but that will be tempered somewhat by a keen wind, which will only strengthen further as we go through the course of the evening and overnight. Quite a wet and windy night to come across the far north of Scotland. That rain will transfer its way southwards as we go through the course of the night. We'll end up around the central belt as we start Monday morning. But as you can see, a mild night for all of us, really. So we will certainly start the new working week on that mild note. But for Glasgow and Edinburgh, could be quite a slow commute as that rain comes through. It will transfer its way further southwards as we go through the course of the day. So it may well cheer up across the far north of Scotland, but feeling a little bit chillier here. So south of it, mild but rather cloudy. Any sunshine will be very limited as we go through the course of the afternoon. But temperatures still reaching 13, possibly 14 degrees in a few spots. Tuesday will then be very similar. We'll see another mild day, but a good deal of cloud with the rain generally focused across the north. Then Wednesday turns colder for us all with the risk of some wintry showers, especially across the north, and then that will continue as we go into Thursday.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Boris Johnson warns that ditching the Northern Ireland Protocol would be a great mistake.
Good morning. It's 7 o'clock on Sunday, the 19th of February. This is Breakfast on GB News with Angela Rippon and myself, Martin Dorbin. Here are your top stories this morning.
Boris Johnson is on a collision course with Downing Street over the Northern Ireland Protocol. In his first intervention since leaving Number 10, the former Prime Minister has issued a stark warning over plans to abandon the bill.
The UK will support allies who have fighter jets ready to hand over to the Ukraine. Speaking in Germany, Rishi Sunak says Kyiv has been failed by the West's security guarantees following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
In the race to replace Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and former Minister Ash Regan have become the first to announce that they will stand to take over as SNP leader and Scotland's First Minister.
It's been nearly 2 weeks now since the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. We'll be taking a look at how the two countries are managing after the aftermath and speaking with the British rescue team who have helped just returned home.
As ever, of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing us to gbviews@gbnewsuk. It's a nice, easy address to remember that, isn't it? Which is why I think so many of you have been doing exactly that this morning. We got lots of comments on the stories we had in our first hour this morning, so good to hear from you in the next hour too. Now, Rishi Sunak's efforts to break the impasse over the Northern Ireland Protocol have been dealt quite a major blow today by Boris Johnson. He's waded in, hasn't he?
Yeah, Boris is back. The former Prime Minister says dropping the deal, which would empower the UK to unilaterally scrap parts of the treaty, would be a great mistake.
Well, his comments come after Mr Sunak said yesterday that a deal is by no means done. So let's get some reaction to this. The author, broadcaster and journalist Eamon Malley is joining us now. Eamon, Boris throwing his hat in the ring again. Of course, it was his decision to have that border down the North Sea as part of the protocol. Do you agree that he's got the right line on this, or should we be backing Rishi Sunak for some different form of protocol?
Well, I think it's an extraordinary step by Boris Johnson to intervene at this point while the Prime Minister is in the depths of negotiating with Europe. Well, it's not the first time he's done this. We must realise that he has been flying in and out of Ukraine, almost upstaging the Prime Minister before he had a seat in his feet on the ground in Downing Street. So this sort of intervention I don't think is constructive at this point in time. Sunak is up against it at so many levels, and I think he could do without the intervention of Boris Johnson in essence.
OK, just talking through some of the technicalities here for our viewers who may not know the importance of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which, of course, gives Britain the power to cherry-pick, if you like, bits from the legislation it doesn't like. So for example, on Clause 20 is about supremacy of the ECJ. DUP don't want that, and that's a key thing remaining in Britain's hand. And Boris is basically saying if Rishi drops this, he'll be handing power back to Brussels. Is that right?
If anyone indulges in absolutism here, there will not be a deal. I lived through every twist and turn of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, you can take it from me. as somebody who has studied in great detail, who's read the papers of the Good Friday Agreement, you will find at the end of the day here, anyone adopting a position of absolutism, and if that's the position being adopted by the Democratic Unionist Party or Boris or anybody else, there will be no deal. Now, contrary to all what's been said, my instinct here is that the Democratic Unionist Party are not confident that the deal is on the horizon. That's my sense of how they view the world at this moment in time. Now, if they opt for what I call absolutism, in other words, there can be no Irish Sea border, there can be no ECJ, European Court jurisdiction at any level in Northern Ireland, then this thing is not going to work. If they're going to hold the British government to ransom on that issue, we will not have a government in Northern Ireland. So there has to be flexibility. Now, going back to old tactics of negotiations, they were deployed during the Good Friday Agreement. Constructive ambiguity, fudge. This goes right back to the days of Henry Kissinger. You'll have side letters. You'll have all sorts of stunts. You'll have influencers coming into play. Maybe Joe Biden will ring Jeffrey Donaldson at a critical moment. This all happened during the negotiations of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the problems here are less in many ways than they were during the Good Friday Agreement, and we got there. But we're at a dangerous point of negotiations, and the intervention of Boris Johnson and people like him at this point in time could cause an absolute chaotic situation.
It's interesting that I was listening to a former Irish ambassador to Britain saying that he thinks that actually Richie is going to be able to get at least 80% of what he wants. But as you say, so many people now are poking their noses into this and giving us contradictory attitudes towards the whole situation. Do you think, I mean, even the Prime Minister himself says there is still an awful lot of work to be done. Are we all sort of speculating in a vacuum here? And actually, we should just let them get on with it and stop trying to speculate about what they're going to do and who is going to respond to it, and just let them get on with it and tell us at the very end when they've come up with a decision.
That's not the way the system works, Angela. You've been around.
I know it's not, but I'm just thinking perhaps in this case it should be.
No, that's not the way. Like you mean to say, the intervention of Johnson, that's almost forcing the Prime Minister to negotiate in Europe with his hand behind his back, particularly if the ERG and people like that start interfering. And I think they will. Now, the Democratic Unionist Party is in a difficult position here. There are those who hold that they've put themselves in the corner, and getting out of that will be very difficult. Currently, Sinn Féin holds the upper hand here. Michelle O'Neill is the First Minister-elect. That's going to be potentially problematical for the Democratic Unionists. Even if we had a resolution here, there will be those who would say that Jeffrey Donaldson should not go into government if Sinn Féin have the upper hand. So that's another problem with which he's going to have to deal down the road. So those making life difficult for Jeffrey Donaldson and for Rishi Sunak now are doing us no favour here in Northern Ireland.
OK, Eamon, well, I'd like to get another voice on this now. I'm going to bring in GB News political reporter Catherine Forster, who's joining us now. Catherine, Boris is back, or at least he's reared his head and he's barking. How's that gone down in Westminster circles?
Not very well at all. Basically, senior Tories are grumbling that he's meddling, that it's mischievous and deeply unhelpful. There's certainly a lot of backseat driving by former Prime Ministers going on at the moment, isn't there? Just 2 weeks on since Liz Truss and her 4,000-word piece on what she got right or what she got wrong, and then her interventions on China, and now Boris Johnson on the Northern Irish Protocol. And of course, this is the deal that Boris Johnson signed to get Brexit over the line, to help him get that 80-seat majority in Parliament. Boris Johnson told business leaders in Northern Ireland that there would be no checks down the Irish Sea, that they could tear up any paperwork if they were given any, and it hasn't quite worked out like that, has it? Now, it does look like in terms of checks, there will be a green channel, so goods that are travelling from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and not going on into the south of Ireland won't be subject to much in the way of checks at all. Red light, more checks for goods passing through on to Ireland. But certainly the role of the European Court of Justice is likely to cause huge problems, and the Democratic Unionist Party, although they have said there's progress, still have real concerns. So as Rishi Sunak has said, still some work to do.
Catherine, what's the gossip, which I've just sort of caught a little bit of, which suggests that if Rishi doesn't get this right, his position as Prime Minister will come into question?
Well, certainly this has been discussed for some time, that Rishi Sunak, with some people in the party, is really rather on borrowed time, and that the May elections are a flashpoint. But even before we get to that, the issue of the Northern Irish Protocol, if he brings a deal forward that the European Research Group feel is unacceptable, that the DUP feel is unacceptable, if he then got that deal through Parliament with borrowed votes from Labour, as Keir Starmer has promised, that obviously would be problematic for him, to put it mildly. Now, some of the ERG, I should say it's not as strong a force as it was a couple of years ago. Some prominent members like Steve Baker, who was a real Brexit hardman, is now Minister for Northern Ireland. He's now been taken into the fold. He's been quite apologetic about some of the behaviour that took place in the past. But certainly there are many people that will still not be happy and might think that they would be better off bringing Boris Johnson back.
And Catherine, that sentiment may be emboldened by the fact, it's interesting, isn't it? The Labour Party have said they will back whatever deal comes back without even seeing it. Now, surely that suggests, call me a cynic, that suggests that they're happy to wave this through, because if they get into power, well, you'd have to be a cynic and say they would probably just ratchet back to closer alignment with the European Union. What are people talking about that in Westminster?
Well, of course, this offer of Labour's is ostensibly helpful, isn't it, to the government, but then really not that helpful for Rishi Sunak, because potentially it stirs up trouble within Tory ranks. And Labour, of course, Keir Starmer was Mr Remain, wasn't he? He led the charge going back before the election, before he was leader, calling for a second referendum. So many people are very distrustful of what Labour would do about Brexit if they got back into power. Now Labour are maintaining that it's done and dusted, that there would no going back into the single market, into the customs union, etc. But David Lammy made a speech I was at a few weeks ago, and they were certainly talking about a much closer relationship, but it was unclear how they were going to get there. And it did sound rather like having your cake and eating it. So for all the words that Labour give, I think some people will still be quite mistrustful on them over Brexit.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. We're going to move on to another aspect of the things that are on Rishi Sunak's shoulders at the moment, and that, of course, is the Ukraine, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. So he's been talking tough about sending help, sending jets specifically to Ukraine with the aid of allies Poland and America. So talking about that now, we have another guest.
We've got Portia with us, Portia Berry-Kilby joining us. Portia, I think the Prime Minister is sort of between a rock and a hard place on Ukraine at the moment, isn't he? Because there he is in Munich saying that we've all got to double down and give more support to Ukraine. But at the same time, here at home, he's got a battle on his hands with the Secretary of State for Defence, saying we haven't got enough money being spent on how we protect our own borders here at home.
Well, that's very true, and it's not exactly the best timing, is it? Because we know that the UK has been quite a vocal and active supporter of Ukraine since the war started. But then we have Ben Wallace saying over the past couple of days that this has highlighted the vulnerabilities of the UK defence. And at a time when there are fairly few soldiers compared with recent years, this isn't the best thing. And spending in between 2010 and 2017, there's something about £6 billion cut in real money in terms of what was going to UK defence. So there definitely has to be a build-up of what is spent at home if more is going to be sent to Ukraine. And at the same time, European countries need to do their part to help out as well. It can't just be left to the UK and the US.
It's interesting, Portia, how this has changed over time. So the UK donated £2.1 billion in aid to Ukraine in 2022. Rishi's call for doubling down. We don't know if that means financially, but still, we've gone from helmets to tanks to jets. This is a clear escalation. And initially, at the start of this conflict, people were quite concerned about this kind of military aid being perceived as an act of aggression or even an act of war. Do you think this brings us nearer to that, or is this just clever strategy kind of moving forward inch by inch?
I think it has been fairly proportionate, and I think the most natural response is it is at the end of the day Russia who is escalating things. It hasn't been the UK just sending in jets straight away. It has been in response to Russia's continued aggression and the recognition that Ukraine needs more support if it's going to win. And there's going to be tanks sent from the UK to Ukraine by the end of March. That's 6 weeks away. This isn't going to be solved within a fortnight. But at the same time, there needs to be some long-term strategy. And how can the Ukraine be helped to succeed in the long term? That might require jets. Obviously, to get to that point, that takes time. Pilots need to be trained not only in how to fly things, but also how to maintain them on the ground, because it can't then be done by the owner of the jet once it's in the Ukraine, because that distinction between direct and indirect support gets blurred even further. So there definitely has to be a long-term plan at play, but it is at the end of the day responding to Russia that's escalated the attacks, and it's not just the UK charging ahead willy-nilly.
No. And we know, of course, that the German Chancellor is represented at this particular conference at the moment in Germany, that the Vice President of the United States is there. But I think also we've got President Macron, who has waded in, saying that we have to be very careful how we handle President Putin. Now, it's being said that he's actually giving mixed messages. So presumably what Macron is saying at the moment is not in line with everyone else and not particularly helpful to the cause.
It isn't helpful at all, and you need a unified front. And I think any dithering from European leaders stands in very stark contrast from what Kamala Harris said when she says that Russia, the US has found, is guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. This is a huge allegation from the US. And there is kind of general consensus, at least nominally, amongst some EU states. But if that is the case, there should be, without fail, a unified response from Europe, from the West. So if you then have President Macron kind of dithering and not really being clear, you're not helping matters at all.
Well, I wonder, Portia, if Macron is still smarting about the fact that Zelensky hoved into view in Paris in that magnificent United Kingdom emblazoned jet when he landed. I digress. I wonder if the clever thing about this is the deployment of jets. I mean, this isn't like giving somebody a car. You can't just drive a jet. You can't just fly it. It's a longer-term strategic manoeuvre. And it's more about, isn't it, the longer-term commitment to defending that frontier with the old hard East. It's not about a quick fix. It's a strategic, longer-term, more sensible view.
For sure. And there's a couple of problems that come with the provision of jets. That it is the escalation of it. But secondarily, you have to make sure that they have pilots trained in how to fly these things. You need to make sure that people can maintain them on the ground. And then across all of this, you also just need to take into consideration that jets aren't always suitable for all terrains, all environments, depending on the airspace that is available and what Russia has in terms of that's their own capabilities. So there's lots at play in this whole situation, but it is important that if people want Ukraine to win, they will probably need jets. And it's not just a matter of holding Russia off, it's about reclaiming the land they've lost. There's no Ukraine won't go down without a fight, and they're not going to settle with just keeping Russia at bay where they are. They want their land back, and that's going to take support from other players.
And quite a lot of time too. Portia, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Yeah.
That's Portia Barry-Kilby, who is a representative of Young Voices UK.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's great to get a young voice on this rather than grizzled old campaigners like myself. Anyhow, let's bring up to date on all of today's top stories now.
France's President Macron says that he wants to see Russia defeated in Ukraine, but not crushed. Emmanuel Macron says that the West should not aim for a total defeat of Moscow on its own soil. His comment sparked criticism from some other NATO allies, saying he's delivering mixed messages, which is what we've just been talking about.
Yes,
there.
indeed. Yeah. And former US President Jimmy Carter is receiving hospice care at his home in Georgia. A statement from the Carter Center says the 98-year-old made the decision after a series of hospital stays, saying he wants to spend his remaining time at home with his family.
And we've said before, I think that's a very dignified response there. Now, an anthem written by the composer Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber, or Lord Webber, is one of 12 new pieces of music that's going to be played for King Charles at his coronation in May. Now, the King has requested also that there's Greek Orthodox music to be played in tribute to his late father, of course, the Duke of Edinburgh.
And if you watched earlier, there's a promise from you, Angela, that you're going to start singing about it later.
No.
Yeah,
not going to start singing. No, because we're going to be looking at some of the music that is going to be played, actually.
There's more to come. We're going to look at the weekend sports with Aidan McGee.
Promise I won't be singing.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News. the People's Channel.
Welcome back. It's 24 minutes past 7, and you are watching and listening to Breakfast with Angela and Martin.
Yeah, and regular viewers will know that Aidan McGee, our sports guru, always comes bearing gifts of perfume. And this one, this is what, David Bowie's favourite?
Yeah, yes. It's called Creed Silver Mountain Water. Yeah, it was developed in 1995. Ricky Martin and David Bowie are the chief protagonists when it first launched. But David Bowie is actually from Bromley, like me, and he filmed a video back in 1993 called The Buddha of Suburbia, about 5 minutes walk away from my house. So I'm doffing my cap to that history of my local area.
I have two fragrant gentlemen sitting next to me today.
A font of knowledge and a fine-smelling one of that. And talking about a fine smell,
yes.
The top of the league yesterday, Arsenal on fire, but Man City had a bit of a wobble thanks to my team, Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, what a performance by Forest. They weathered the storm. Arsenal have had a difficult few weeks, and both clubs, both City and Arsenal, were on the road yesterday in the Midlands. Arsenal were losing at Villa twice, and suddenly we're thinking this is the death knell for their title race. They will have known at half-time that City were winning 1-0, but things turn around in the second half, and sometimes when you're going for the title, you need it ebbs and flows, things change on a week-to-week basis. But that was a huge blow for Arsenal in midweek, losing at home to Manchester City. They've negated that advantage City gained almost by earning a 2-point turnaround yesterday by winning at Villa. They were drawing going into added time. They're smashing 2 goals. They literally blew the house in. And that's what you have to do if you really want to win titles, whether you're the champions or champions-elect. And City, they missed loads of chances at Forest. And Forest, let me come on to Chelsea in a second, but I mean, they signed so many players in the summer. It's one of the most difficult things in football, Martin.
25, is it?
It's one of the most difficult things in football to sign all those players and integrate them to a team. Is it any level of sport? Is it any level of life when you have so many members of staff coming into a building and you have to integrate them and make a team out of them? I've seen it happen in the past. It doesn't tend to work. But Forest have done it so well. Chelsea have had this problem just more recently in January. They spent £300 million in January on players. Yesterday, they lose at home to Southampton.
Booed off for half-time and full-time.
And their captain gets a really serious injury as well, sadly, as well. We're waiting on an update on him today.
Quickly on Forest, because it's very rare I get a chance to kind of... Forest had 15% of possession, 1 shot on goal, totally weathered a storm, but still got a point. That's 8 games unbeaten at home for Forest. Turned into a bit of a fortress now.
It is. That's exactly what a promoted club has to do, Martin. But 15% possession, that's extraordinary, even against a team like Manchester City. It means you're not carrying the ball for 8.5 minutes out of every 10.
But still got a result.
Absolutely, yeah.
You've got to tell us about what is going on at Newcastle, because while I'm not that interested in the play, there's a sort of French farce going on up there, isn't there, with their goalkeepers?
So Nick Pope, who's been in imperious form all season, he got sent off. Martin Dubravka, who was number 1 up until about a year ago at Newcastle, comes on, plays very well. They lose 2-0. They've got 10 men against Liverpool. It's very difficult. They've got a Carabao Cup final next week at Wembley against Manchester United. They haven't played a Wembley final since 1999. So it's a huge, huge game for the City. Pope's suspended. Dubravka is cup-tied because he played for next week's opponents, Manchester United, earlier in the season. You can't play for 2 teams in the same competition. Now, extraordinarily, he can't play. That means that if Man United win next week, though, he qualifies for a medal for Manchester United.
This is ridiculous.
So if Newcastle lose in the dressing room, someone's going to come into the Newcastle dressing room and say, "Oh, by the way, Martin, there's your medal for playing in the early rounds this week," and then earlier in the season. And then it looks like Loris Karius hasn't been seen for 5 years since he dropped 2 clangers in the Champions League final. Liverpool could play. There's a fellow called Mark Gillespie as well who come in, but they lost 2-0 yesterday. They've not been in great form the last few weeks, but of course we mentioned Christian Atsu yesterday. It was Bobby Robson. It would have been Bobby Robson's 90th birthday yesterday as well. It was quite an emotional scene at St James's Park, but they couldn't match up with the result. But the goalkeeper thing added a bit of farce.
It's a farce, isn't it?
It is.
And I wonder if United win, would he do a John Terry and just appear in the back? He'll appear in the background holding up the cup.
I don't think he'll put on the Man United kit somehow.
OK, let's talk about the scrap at the other end of the table. I think it's going to go all the way. It's a fascinating battle down there. Mercifully, at the moment, Forest are slightly above that. But this Chelsea match at Southampton, I mean, Southampton...
It wasn't at Southampton, it was at Chelsea.
Yeah, but they put off a miracle to get a result. The Chelsea gaffer is really, really under fire.
Yeah, he dressed... So this guy, Sellers, his name is, he's never been a manager before. He's not really played football. He's come through the kind of technocrat route. He's always been an analyst. But he dressed differently yesterday because he's a manager.
Yeah.
He put his double-breasted suit jacket on. He had a nice roll neck on. And he said afterwards, I dressed like that because I wanted to show authority to the players and I wanted to show that I'm a manager. I'll tell you what, it worked because they won with a 1-0
Yeah.
A free kick. First time they've done a double over Chelsea since 1988.
Wow. And Everton Leeds, that was a 6-pointer. How did that go?
Yes, it was 1-0 to Everton. That's 2 wins out of 3 for them. I suppose the middle game against Liverpool they wouldn't have expected to win, but I tell you what, they're right in the scrap now. A few weeks ago we thought they were dead and buried, but Sean Dyche has gone in and done really well. Just want to touch on the United takeover.
Yep.
The briefing is really in overdrive now. The Qataris are going in and saying they're briefing journalists about what they're going to do at Manchester United.
Is that a done deal then?
It's not a done deal, no, but it's the football equivalent of the hustings. It's almost, Brian Man United is like the Olympics. It's like bidding for the Olympics. You're getting bids from all these different countries around the world. It's astonishing, really. And they're now making a play to all the different journalists and saying, look, this is what we can do. I remember covering Olympic bids years ago, and I used to have organisers ringing me up and saying, look, this is what we're going to do. Did you know that? Can you report that? And it's pretty much the same now. The big story in the Mail on Sunday, Jim Ratcliffe saying that he's going to put fans at the heart of everything they do. He's going to make 25% shares available for fans to buy, whether they be wealthy fans or less wealthy fans. They can buy chunks of the club. And the Qataris are saying, well, they will guarantee to update Old Trafford, which is needed.
Yeah, and I wonder if the fans care about ownership or stadiums or just having a massive chequebook. Forget about the morals. We just want a massive chequebook to buy the best players in the world.
Two-thirds of United fans have been polled, so they would prefer Jim Ratcliffe to take over. Now, I know he's from Failsworth. He was born in Oldham. I don't think he's been back there very much recently, if I'm honest with you. But, I mean, look, he tried to buy Chelsea last year. He's a Chelsea season ticket holder. He's got a club in France who are not exactly pulling up trees. Just because he's English doesn't mean he's going to be a great owner. Manchester City have had great owners in the last 14 years. They regenerated the whole of East Manchester as part of their project. I'd call them good owners, even though they're a little bit controversial at the minute.
And what's his track record of the companies that he has taken over?
Ratcliffe.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good, I have to say. I mean, look, he's made billions of pounds out of Ineos. I mean, it's difficult because he went into British cycling with Sky having owned it for years and years.
Mercedes,
Look, I mean, you can't say he's done, but you cannot earn that amount of money unless you're successful at what you do. But managing a football club is different, and I've said this many times over the years, Andrew. It's not the usual business rules do not apply. You go into a football club, most of the organisation runs like any other FTSE company. Your head of marketing will probably earn the same as the head of marketing might earn at a high street store, but you've got this big hole in the middle: player transfer fees, player wages, agents' fees. It's one big black hole. Money after money after money gets slung down there, and you probably never see it again.
It's a money pit, isn't it?
Oh, without question.
Only the football
without
club.
question, very, very few people make money out of it, I have to say.
Aidan McGee, back of the net, mate. Superb, action-packed hour there for us.
I just say New Zealand, now down in New Zealand, England pulling up trees with the cricket as well. They won by 267 runs, and they've got a second test in Wellington on Friday.
Are you back in an hour's time?
No, I'm not.
Why not?
They've had enough of me.
I'd like more of you. Anyway, more to come. We're going to look at the front pages this time, inside the pages, this time with Fraser Myers, who's turned up, and Candice Holdsworth. Candice Holdsworth, please join us after the break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back on this Sunday morning at 7:35. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Angela and Martin.
And we're going to take a look now at today's front pages because we start with The Observer, where they lead with Johnson threatens Sunak's bid to end the deadlock over Brexit.
Boris is back, like it or lump it. The Independent's front page, the sick children left to suffer as wait for care on NHS soars.
Now, The Sun on Sunday goes with Andrew evicted from £30 million mansion.
And you can hear the world's smallest violins in the background as the Daily Star reports on the rise of alien-related work absences.
Oh, yes. Time to go through the papers now, though. Joining us this morning, we have two people. We've got Candice Holdworth, who's a writer and commentator, and he's arrived.
Hello.
And it is Fraser Myers, who is the deputy editor of Spiked. We should explain, I'm sorry, because the viewers and listeners who were not with us earlier, you overslept this morning, didn't you?
Wrong kind of snow, wrong leaves on the track.
Yeah,
all of that, yeah.
Maybe aliens beamed you up momentarily. Well, they've beamed you in now. Let's beam you straight in. Fraser, my favourite subject, a little bit of Brexit at breakfast.
Yes, so this is the story, the least surprising story of the year, that Rishi Sunak is preparing to betray Brexit. He is going to do a deal with the European Union. I mean, it's not fully all been signed off. The T's and I's yet to be crossed. But he's going to allow a role for the European Court of Justice.
Well, it's what he wants.
Well, that's the doomsday scenario, you might say. We don't know the detail, but that is what Brexiteers are certainly afraid of.
That's what everyone suspects. It's what the EU, actually, Maros Sefcovic, who's in charge of, on the EU side of these negotiations, has been boasting that the ECJ is going to play a role. So all the signs, all the noises are pointing in that direction. And, you know, that's really significant. We voted as a United Kingdom to leave the European Union, and a part of our country is going to be under the jurisdiction of a foreign court. That is a major problem. Now, Sunak will defend himself by saying we're dealing with the practical issues created by the Northern Ireland Protocol. Previously, you know, pretty much every good crossing from Great Britain into Northern Ireland was being checked. In fact, this had become a pretty sore point because the EU were really, you know, going overboard. Pretty much, I think it was around one point, around 2/3 of all of the EU's custom checks of all goods coming from the entire world into the EU were happening in between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Yeah. So clearly this issue did have to be resolved. Sunak is going to play up the practicalities of that, but really we've got to hold his feet to the fire on the principle. You know, we should not have the European Court of Justice playing a role in domestic British life.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. Candice, your thoughts on this matter? Is the last thing or the best thing we need now a return of Bozza?
I think for Rishi Sunak, it must just be such a headache. He's just sort of ignoring him and hoping that he can just get positive headlines for what he sees as finding a resolution to this. Because I think Rishi Sunak is a bit more of a... He sees himself as a pragmatist and he's finding a deal. But there are those within the Conservative Party who really do see this as a betrayal. And Boris Johnson, who is very good at picking up on these things, may try to use it.
Well, we had a lot of GB views on this, and so just to interact there for a moment, Peter from Harold Wood says Boris is still the most powerful politician in the United Kingdom, and hopefully he does come back as leader of the Conservative Party again, because things get done when he's in charge. The trouble is the thing that he did with the Northern Ireland Protocol as it stands at the moment is having a disastrous effect on the commerce of Northern Ireland, and it's the viewers in Northern Ireland watching us at the moment now who will say, it ain't working for us.
Well, he would say, not to defend him too much, he and Lord Frost, who negotiated the deal, they would say that they inherited a lot of these problems from Theresa May and Ollie Robbins, and that period when we weren't really negotiating for a Brexit. The withdrawal agreement that was agreed on had all kinds of problems, and then the deal that Boris did is actually... leaves us a lot, gives us a lot more freedom from the EU than actually many of us would have expected.
But Theresa May made a statement in Parliament saying exactly the opposite, saying that no British Prime Minister should ever agree to a border down the Irish Sea.
But what she ended up agreeing to was the backstop. People might remember that from years ago, which essentially said that if we don't reach a deal on Northern Ireland, then the whole of the UK should remain in the European the EU customs union. So these are two terrible situations, granted.
The backstop was Theresa May's downfall. It was the downfall of her party. In many senses, let the Brexit party in. It got me involved in politics. It would have betrayed the United Kingdom. As you can tell, I can talk about Brexit all day. Shall we move on?
Not letting you, no. Candice, Jihadi Jack's mum has written a book, according to the Sunday Times.
What?
Yes, so this caught my eye. So this is a story in the Sunday Times. The mother of Jihadi Jack, the lesser-known ISIS person who left to join ISIS and had his citizenship stripped. She's written a book called Reasonable Cause to Suspect, where apparently she examines her own role in her son becoming radicalised. And she's blamed her liberal parenting, but some of the things she described, I don't know if I would describe them as liberal, I would describe them as maybe irresponsible. So she had apparently drug addicts living in the house with them when he was a child, who would rob the house and have all sorts of strange people coming and going. She also thinks that he was very isolated from his family, which is why he was drawn to ISIS. I must say, I really like hearing from the parents of people who do extreme things, because I think often we can examine these things from a macro perspective and look at all the cultural and social forces, but sometimes the key to understanding someone's behaviour can be from the home, things that they were exposed to when they were younger. And I thought this with things like Oscar Pistorius, the Columbine killers, when one of their mothers came out and was talking about what went on in their household. So, yeah, just very interesting for me as well as a parent.
It depends on how honest they are being, actually, about their own role in the child's upbringing, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Fraser, I can hear you gnashing your teeth in the background there. It's liberalism that's to blame, nothing at all to do with perhaps his faith or his political leanings.
Yeah, I do find this a bit of a bizarre mea culpa. I don't think liberal parenting is that bad. Can I defend liberal parenting on GB News? I don't think it's what's turning people into ISIS killers. No. Certainly. I mean, this is what's strange, isn't it? I mean, ISIS is such an obvious sort of neo-fascistic. If you were going to put it on the left-right spectrum, you put it really, really far to the right, given it's ultra-conservative, ultra-racist, it's Islamic supremacist. So it's about a million, as far away from this sort of lovey-dovey liberal parenting as you can get. He's going there throwing gays off buildings and things like that.
I always thought liberal parents led to sort of an obsession with, like, Greta Thunberg.
That's what I would have thought,
not Islamist terrorism.
It sounds like her ideals haven't been imparted on him whatsoever, more than anything.
OK, a story that certainly caught my eye in the front of the Sunday Telegraph. My old mucker from Ashfield, I stood against him in the 2019 election, never short of a word or two. New Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. Lee Anderson's been putting the cat amongst the pigeons again. What's he done this time?
He is a sort of one-man headline-generating machine, isn't he, Lee Anderson? The Deputy Chairman of the Tory Party. He's now saying that refugee charities are as bad as people smugglers. Now, his rationale for that is that it's part of a kind of, I don't know whether you want to call it industry or network of infrastructure around Calais. He says they're encouraging people to make the journey. I don't know if that's fair. I think some of the work that people like Care for Calais do is legitimate. You know, these people need help. They're not allowed to work, so they need clothing, shelter, etc., etc. And they might need legal representation. Everyone deserves that, whether they are here legally, illegally, whatever. That's just a basic kind of human right. But where I think he does have a point is that some of these charities, in the way that they influence, essentially are, in a sense, they're dictating government policy. I think that is kind of the issue. So I don't even agree with the Rwanda scheme, but I think it's a problem that the elected government can't get it off the ground because of the interference of lawyers, because of the interference of charities and NGOs. You know, then you have to ask who actually runs this country if we can't even have an immigration policy. It's interesting, I was looking at some of the figures around deportations. Deportations, even for criminals, have gone down by 63% since 2019, since the pandemic. And I think that's got to be a result, you know, something that's got to be something to do with the growth of these kinds of charities and their influence.
And I wonder, Candice, you know, are people like Lee Anderson useful? They're flying these kites of the more, you might say, the more extreme end of the idea spectrum, but they do appeal, don't they, to a certain part of the electorate, or is he kind of an accident waiting to happen?
I think, I mean, from what I've read, he's actually responsible for a small bump in the Conservative Party's vote.
5% in 1 week.
Yes, I mean, he sort of broaches subjects that maybe other Conservatives are a bit scared to broach, but he knows are popular with the electorate, and this is a very popular topic with the electorate. And I think the criticism he has, and I so agree with Fraser on this, is that, yes, fine, you know, these charities do many legitimate things, but they're also very far to the left of most of the British population, and they have their own agenda, and what they do isn't shared, or the ideas they have aren't shared by the general British public. So I think it's good to give them some scrutiny.
But it's an indication of the way in which the country as a whole is divided on this issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Candice, you've been looking at Me Too in schools. This is a story in the Sunday Times. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I find this fascinating. So this was in the Sunday Times. It was an anonymous story by a mother of a son who'd been accused of very serious sexual assault. He's a teenage boy. It was at his school. He's about 14 years old. Apparently, he put his hand on a girl's leg, which he thought was a completely consensual encounter. Later on, a third party reported him for sexual assault. It was referred to the police and the social services, the Children's Protection Services, who said that they thought the school's response was disproportionate. And this boy's been left with, apparently, a lot of social anxiety, doesn't want to interact with other girls because he was branded a rapist and all kinds of horrible things. And this can be such a difficult subject to broach, but I'm glad the Sunday Times is broaching it, because I think that as adults, what we may be doing by overcorrecting for things that had to do with Me Too, we may be interfering with the healthy, normal social development of young teenage boys and young teenage girls who will touch each other, who will hang off each other a bit, and we don't want to pathologise normal social interactions between teenagers. So, yeah, as the mother of 2 young boys, this is something that interests me a lot.
Well, amen to that, Fraser. That's wonderful to hear that. Thank you. Don't you think this is part of the ongoing, not just demonisation of boys, but of all young people? My boy is 13. He's terrified of being called a transphobe, of being called a racist. All these labels that are applied, and there's a huge amount of pressure on kids who, let's face it, they're teenagers, they make mistakes.
Well, yeah, you need to be free to make mistakes. You need to be free to you know, discover people's boundaries and things like that. That's the age at which you should be allowed to do that. Unfortunately, you know, there are people will do something wrong and then they'll be hounded on Twitter or TikTok, or there's this website which is mentioned in this article called Everyone's Invited, which is basically naming and shaming children for, you know, they say sexual assault, but it could be anything. You don't know what people are being accused of and whether it's true or not. And instead of adults, instead of trying to say, you know, calm down, everyone, they're doing the opposite. They're saying, yes, actually, we do have a problem with sexual assault in schools. The school, after this incident happened, they were all given a consent class in assembly, which actually just fueled the rumours, because when this boy was suspended and suddenly we're having, you know, being educated about consent and about rape, obviously that just gives that makes people think, yes, this is what has happened, and it just spirals out of control. So adults really need to be careful about this.
It's so tough for young kids nowadays
Yes.
to know where the dividing line is.
Yeah.
They find themselves between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, we've got saying, we've got to have more hugs and you've got to be more tactile with people.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what is tactile and what is sexual? And how does a 12 or a 13 or a 14-year-old make that distinction? I don't know.
Well, it's an incredibly difficult world they're growing up in, and sometimes it's hard not to believe that our children are just part of some big social experiment, and they're all confused, they don't know what to do. And I fear, as you say, Candice, a lot of young boys in particular are going to start retreating into their shells, believing that the labels stick on them, and I think it's a terrible state of affairs. It's been a very, very thought-provoking pay-per-view. Thank you, Fraser and Candice. It's been tremendous.
Thanks.
We're going to bring you up to date now with what is going on elsewhere in the news today. Boris Johnson has warned Rishi Sunak that dropping the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill would be a great mistake. The agreement was set in motion when Mr Johnson himself was Prime Minister. But government says a successful outcome of recent talks would mean that the Protocol Bill would no longer be needed.
And Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and Foreign Minister Ash Regan have become the first to announce their running to replace Nicola Sturgeon as the SNP leader. Other candidates tipped to stand for election are Finance Minister Kate Forbes and Deputy Leader Keith Brown.
An Iranian TV channel based in the UK says it's been forced to move to the United States over safety fears for its journalists. Iran International TV say it's reluctantly closed its West London studios, but staff refuse to be silenced by threats from Tehran. The government has responded by condemning the lack of respect for basic rights from the Iranian regime. Well, it's been 2 weeks since the mega earthquake that devastated large swathes of Turkey and Syria happened.
And against incredible odds, rescue teams continue to perform miracles and are still pulling people out alive from under the rubble, often with the help of specialist dogs.
Now, 11,000 international search and rescue units from 80 different countries have gone to provide support to the affected region. And I'm delighted to say we're joined now by the leader of one of those teams. It's Ryan Gray from the K9 Search and Rescue Unit. You're in Northern Ireland. And I think, Ryan, you've got one of the two dogs that you took with you. Just tell us about the dogs and how important they have been in the rescue effort in a situation like this.
Yes, good morning. So this is Max. He's a lot more chilled out this morning than he has been for the last sort of week. Dogs are very, very important in scenarios like earthquakes. They clear the rubble sites extremely fast and indicate potentially if there's someone below the rubble, which then allows the rescue workers to start digging down and try and free those people below the rubble.
And can you tell us specifically about a couple of the incidents that the dogs were involved in? I believe there was actually a really happy ending to one of those tales.
There was, yes. So pretty much on the last day of our deployment, both of our dogs and a Portuguese dog indicated to say there was somebody alive below, I think it was a 7-story block that had completely pancaked down on itself. The dogs were adamant there was someone alive down there, and eventually then the Chinese rescue team came on site with a fantastic piece of equipment that locates heartbeat, and they also then confirmed, and a 42-year-old woman was rescued from under that rubble. You can see in the video here, this is one of the dog handlers, Kyle Murray, and search dog Delta, indicating that you can hear the dog barking that she's saying there's someone below there.
And there was actually, as you say, someone down there. Now, when we're watching these pictures, as you say, your two dogs, Max and Delta, we can see the situation that they're working in. There's rubble all around. This is quite a dangerous occupation for dogs, isn't it? Because I think one of the dogs from Mexico was sadly killed when a building collapsed on them. But the dogs come back with their paws cut, with all sorts of possible difficulties. Just tell us about how dangerous it is for the dogs to work and the effect that it has on them.
It is incredibly dangerous. As you said, a search and rescue dog from Mexico died out there, and it died trying to save human life. You know, the dogs are put in very hazardous situations, but it's very well managed. There's a lot of risk assessments. The dogs have boots, they have goggles, And each time they come off a site, that they're inspected thoroughly. And we also carry trauma packs for the dogs should anything happen to them.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a tremendous... I mean, I know that GB News viewers out there will be absolutely ecstatic about this story. They really, really love their dogs. We do know that. Have they become something of local heroes? Must be quite in demand where you are for a nice stroke and a pat on the head and maybe a thank you treat.
Yeah, for sure. Nobody knows our names, and we're totally fine with that. It's where's Max and Delta and the other search and rescue dogs on our team. It was quite overwhelming, actually, in the airport coming back. We flew out of where we were. We flew to Adana and up to Istanbul. And Istanbul's a very big airport, and the Turkish people. It took us a long time to get through the airport. The Turkish people were kissing the dogs and praying for the dogs, calling the dogs heroes. It was very overwhelming.
Well, that's interesting because Turkey doesn't have a very good reputation where its animals are concerned, so perhaps it's helped them to change their opinions. But, I mean, as you say, Max is looking very chilled out there.
Good.
Now you've got him back. Now you've got both of them back. Just very briefly, what are they going to be doing for the next couple of weeks?
Very little, we hope. Obviously, as soon as we land back here, we're straight back on the call-outs for Northern Ireland. To respond to missing people. So they've been about the place. They've got a couple of their pictures taken a couple of times, some press releases. But as much as we can, he'll be lying like this on the sofa, getting his tummy rubbed. I can see his eyes going where he knows we're talking about him. So, yeah, he'll be doing very little.
That's good to hear. Ryan, thank you very much indeed. And thank you also, Max and Delta, for what you did.
Yeah, and isn't it amazing to see that? Because, of course, historically, throughout wars, dogs have been a part of our arsenal. Anyway, more to come, including all the latest on Boris Johnson's intervention on the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that's right after the weather.
Yep.
Hello, I'm Craig Snell, and here's your latest forecast from the Met Office. Well, as we look ahead to the next few days, we'll see some further rain in the north, but the south generally remaining largely dry and feeling mild until we get to Wednesday. So here's the situation for Sunday. We've got an area of high pressure keeping things settled in the south, but this area of low pressure towards the northwest will bring some rain, especially across Scotland as the day goes on. We can see that rain already across the west of Scotland. That will spread its way eastwards during the course of the day. Also allowing a lot of cloud to come into Northern Ireland and Northern England. Can't rule out the odd split and spot of rain, especially across the high ground. Maybe even the far north of Wales seeing the odd splash of rain. But for the rest of England and Wales, it's a dry day. Some good amounts of sunshine, especially down towards southwest England and central southern England. And here temperatures will reach 14 or 15 degrees. A milder day then of late also for the north, but that will be tempered somewhat by a keen wind, which will only strengthen further as we go through the course of the evening and overnight. Quite a wet and windy night to come across the far north of Scotland. That rain will transfer its way southwards as we go through the course of the night. We'll end up around the central belt as we start Monday morning. But as you can see, a mild night for all of us, really. So we will certainly start the new working week on that mild note. But for Glasgow and Edinburgh, could be quite a slow commute as that rain comes through. It will transfer its way further southwards as we go through the course of the day. So it may well cheer up across the far north of Scotland, but feeling a little bit chillier here. To the south of it, mild but rather cloudy. Any sunshine will be very limited as we go through the course of the afternoon. But temperatures still reaching 13, possibly 14 degrees in a few spots. Tuesday will then be very similar. We see another mild day, but a good deal of cloud with the rain generally focused across the north. Then Wednesday turns colder for us all with the risk of some wintry showers, especially across the north, and then that will continue as we go into Thursday.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m, Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Boris Johnson warns that ditching the Northern Ireland Protocol would be a great mistake.
Good Sunday morning. It's 8 o'clock on Sunday, the 19th of February. This is Breakfast on GB News with Angela Rippon and myself, Martin Dordman. And here are top stories this morning.
Boris Johnson is on a collision course with Downing Street over the Northern Ireland Protocol. In his first intervention since leaving Number 10, the former Prime Minister has issued a stark warning over plans to abandon the bill.
The UK will support allies who have fighter jets ready to hand over to Ukraine. Speaking in Germany, Rishi Sunak says Kyiv has been failed by the West's security guarantees following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
In the race to replace Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and former Minister Ash Regan have become the first to announce that they will stand to take over as SNP leader and Scotland's First Minister.
And the price of European natural gas has fallen to its lowest level since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But what will this mean for your bills? We'll be taking a look later in the show.
Indeed, that's something we will be looking at in detail. And as ever, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Please do keep your thoughts coming in, because we do like to know what you think about the stories that we cover here on what is your news programme. Now, Rishi Sunak's efforts to break the impasse over the Northern Ireland Protocol have been dealt a fresh blow by Boris Johnson.
Yeah, the former Prime Minister says dropping the deal, which would empower the UK to unilaterally scrap parts of the treaty, would be a great mistake.
Now, his comments come after Mr Sunak said yesterday that a deal is by no means yet done.
Yeah, well, GB News political reporter Catherine Forster joins us now. So, Catherine, Boris is back. How's that landing in Westminster?
Not terribly well. Some senior Tories have been saying that he's making mischief, basically, and that it's deeply unhelpful because backseat driving by the former PM but one is not really what Rishi Sunak needs at the moment. Now, Boris Johnson's point, of course, is quite important in that he's saying that ditching the Northern Ireland Protocol bill would be a mistake because that bill potentially would mean that the UK could effectively scrap or disregard parts of the protocol if it wanted to. Now, it's currently passing very slowly through the House of Lords and effectively has been paused by Rishi Sunak because he seems to believe that rather than sort of holding this as a weapon over the EU, that he will get better results through asking nicely and through cooperation and certainly being more emollient. But we will see, won't we? There was a lot of excitement late last week that a deal had been done, but it seems that that is not the case. Despite going to Belfast on Friday, he says there's still quite a lot of work to be done, and the Democratic Unionist Party saying that certainly there's a lot of progress. Certainly sounds like huge progress in terms of getting goods into Northern Ireland without checks, but the role of the European Court of Justice still looks very problematic indeed.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed. That's Catherine Forster, our political commentator there. And I'm delighted to say that joining us in the studio to take that story further is the political commentator Peter Spencer, who, as I say, is with us. Peter, listening to everything that is coming out from these discussions, we've got one argument coming out now from Boris, which, as we say, is probably not helpful. We've got all sorts of stuff coming out from the DUP. We've got the EU also giving us mixed messages. And Rishi Sunak himself saying that nothing is a done deal yet. There's still a long way to go. In general, this is just one big mess, isn't it?
It is a big mess, yes, and it's been a big mess ever since Brexit was agreed to because of the fact that Boris Johnson, in my judgment, didn't really think through the implications for Northern Ireland of the hard Brexit that he negotiated. He's now complaining about the fact that Sunak wants to unravel part of his deal, and I have to say that Mandy Rice-Davies springs to mind here. He would, wouldn't he?
Yeah, it was his deal. That's why he wants it to remain set in stone, doesn't he?
But, Peter, the particular sticking point here, or the reason that Boris is rearing onto his hindquarters, is over the NI Protocol bill. Now, that gives the UK the power, effectively, to overrule the EU, particularly Clause 20. That's all about the rule of supremacy of ECJ law over UK law.
Yes.
And this bill gives Britain the power to go no to Brussels. And the rumour is that Rishi will surrender on that. And that's why Boris is saying, if you do that, you're doomed.
Well, the shades of grey here. I mean, what he wants to do is to make the European Court of Justice very, very much the last resort. In other words, water down its powers hugely. Now, if that works, and then his approach, which your commentator here made the point about he wants to try to be a little bit nicer about it, whereas Boris Johnson's approach was very much to give them the one finger sign.
Yeah.
It will make life a great deal easier for all concerned, not least, of course, business in Northern Ireland. And so Rishi Sunak, of course, is having to play an extremely canny game over this. I mean, it seems only yesterday that Tony Blair negotiated the Good Friday Agreement, and I can remember him saying to me after he'd stood up and said his bit, and then Reverend Ian Paisley said, OK, there are no buts, we agree to it. And he made a joke in the Commons about, phew, that's a relief. But he said to me afterwards, actually, I was only two-thirds joking there,
Yeah.
because of the fact that because it's a very, very delicate area and has been ever since the Tudor monarchs in England introduced a policy of ethnic cleansing in the north of Ireland. It is a very, very fractious place and has to be handled with extraordinary care.
The trouble is, I think, we're talking about this, and it is a very important issue, clearly, especially to the people of Northern Ireland.
Yes.
There will be many people watching this programme whose eyes will have glazed over and said, why is this important to us? And I suppose the thing is that at the moment, politically, in terms of what is happening in Northern Ireland, they have no government. The country is in disarray on so many areas, in education and in health,
Yes,
and the rest
absolutely.
of it, and in commerce. Aren't we seeing, Peter, a situation where, in the end, we are going to have a compromise? Because if we don't have... you can't please all the people all the time where the Northern Ireland Protocol is concerned. It's going to have to come down to a compromise.
Absolutely right. I mean, that's particularly interesting because of the fact that we're now hearing that there's going to be an almighty fuss made in Westminster by the so-called Spartans, the die-hard Brexiteers. And I suspect, though, when it comes to it, he's pushing at a slightly less totally jammed, closed door in the north of Ireland because those DUP senior members, they would actually like to start running the show again. So it is a little bit tempting, as distinct from the Tory Eurosceptics in Westminster, who, I mean, broadly speaking, they're the visible personification of absolute intransigence.
Yeah, Peter, I think this is kite flying by Rishi, to be honest. I don't think we'll see anything happening anytime soon. Call me a cynic. Back to flying jets. £2 billion been spent last year by Britain in the Ukraine. Rishi's talked about sending jets to the Ukraine, or at least training pilots to use them. Is this the right thing to do, or is it a more provocative act?
Well, I mean, up to a point, he's doing a little bit, though he wouldn't thank me for saying so, of catch up with Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson, if he has any legacy that's really worth putting up in lights, it's the fact that he acted as the chief cheerleader for Ukraine. And it's worth remembering that Putin's strategy essentially has been, look, they'll get tired of this in the West and then I can trample on Ukraine and then who knows where I'll go after that. And the idea of stiffening sinews is what Boris rightly he militarised, weaponised the English language, and Sunak is following on. That said, I note that that while we have given money, we've also got, and equipment, we've also got senior generals saying we're not even battle ready to defend ourselves. But we note that Sunak is not saying, I'm going to send planes. He's saying, you send planes, we'll train the pilots. Well, that's a jolly sight less expensive, isn't it?
It was a very powerful speech, I think, that Sunak gave. I mean,
yeah.
it was very much
absolutely.
sort of, rip-roaring.
Yeah.
Do you sense a shift in urgency in what he is saying to the rest of Europe, bearing in mind that on Friday we've got the first anniversary of the war, and clearly Putin is going to up his game?
Precisely. And so to that extent, yes, of course, the rhetoric's being ratcheted up. And of course, there are concerns that there will be a faltering of the will to win. And I think Sunak has identified, and I think correctly identified, that there is an existential threat to the West. If Putin gets away with this, then the sky is the limit. And therefore, the urgency is acute. And for some reason, well, because of the fact that Boris is a great talker, Britain has become the chief cheerleader, and so he's taken that baton and he's running with it.
Superb, Peter Spencer. I've been a huge admirer of yours for years. Great to have in the studio. And one thing I didn't have on my bingo card for the show today was a man having a bigger brooch than Angela. So it's wonderful to see. Thanks for coming in.
It's the battle of the brooches, isn't it, Peter? There we go. Thanks. It's lovely to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Sweet of you to broach the subject.
Here we go.
You're getting as bad as him on the puns. Now, European gas prices. Let's talk about something here that is going to touch the pockets of everybody watching the programme. European gas prices have fallen to their lowest level since before Russia's offensive in Ukraine this time last year.
Yeah, the news has been welcomed across the continent as governments hope it will reduce economic turmoil, but households will be wondering, when will the price drop feed through to my energy bills?
And that's someone who can probably tell us more about this, is energy analyst Andy Mayer. Andy, welcome to the programme. And that is the question on everybody's lips. When are our bills going to come down?
So the short answer is not yet. And the reason for that is that we don't link our energy prices that we sell to the customer in the household directly to the wholesale price of gas and power in the market. So we've got a very complicated system in the UK where we interfere in the market and we set prices according to what the regulator guesses they're going to be. So, for example, on Friday, the regulator had its reference period end for the next quarter, which is going to run from April to June. So those prices were guessed too low for this period, and they'll probably go up a little bit as a result of that. But after that, they're going to come down sharply to reflect the fact that we are back down to where the prices were just before the war. So lots of things have happened to enable that to come about. The war hasn't gone as well for Putin as he thought. The Europeans have done a great job of building storage so they can get gas into Europe from places other than Russia. And the warm winter has really been crucial. So next week, for example, we're expecting in the UK temperatures of 16 degrees, which in February is absolutely astonishing. All those things help. And that means we're in a better place than we were when we were looking at this last year. And we were really worried that the lights would go out and we'd have people freezing to death in the winter.
Yeah, Andy, I think viewers will be more than familiar with the idea of rising like a rocket and falling like a feather, normally with petrol pumps, of course, and yet here we are now with gas. The government bought at the top of the market, but they kind of had to, didn't they, to maintain resources, to maintain storage and to keep the lights on. They had to buy at the top of the market, so we perhaps shouldn't be too harsh on them.
Yeah, so the government will be feeling like they can't win on this one. So they've done lots of other things as well to help with prices. In reality, at the moment, our energy prices are about 3 to 4 times higher than they were before the pandemic. And that's really the best way of looking at it. What they're going to do is fall to a level that's still twice as expensive. So whatever happens, you should expect to be paying energy bills that are still twice what you were paying 3 to 4 years ago. They've also brought in welfare measures that are now targeted. And those are things like £900 for people on benefits, £250 for people with disability pension, and £150 for people on disabilities. And all of those things together should ensure that nobody vulnerable is left hard up by their energy bills. But it's still much more expensive than it used to be, and it doesn't help small businesses as well.
And I think what confuses an awful lot of people is they've been seeing over the last couple of weeks these incredible amounts of profit into the billions that companies have made. But am I right in thinking that actually the government says they cannot pass on that money because whatever it is within the terms of their contract, they're actually not allowed to do that, to be able to say to all of us, well, you're going to have, 200 quid off your bill this week?
Yeah, this is where it gets really horribly complicated. So these are different businesses. So people who drill gas and oil out of the ground are, certainly in the North Sea, are in a special tax regime where the profits from that have to be paid through special taxes, windfall taxes, to the Treasury directly. They can't just be passed on. The other people at the other end of the market are the retail energy companies, and we saw loads of those go bust last year because they don't make any money at all. And they're the ones who usually get blamed for these fat cat profits, but it's actually not them. It's simply world oil prices and regional gas prices feeding through the market system in a way that means that when prices are low, they all lose money, some of them go bust. When prices are high, they do make extraordinary profits. But the reaction to that has been oversimplified in the media narrative.
Yeah.
Well, Andy, I know I was saying let's not be too harsh on the government, but actually all of this calamity has been brought about by a terribly myopic, short-sighted energy strategy. We should be planning ahead. Things like shale, not be reliant on foreign overseas supply. Energy sovereignty should be the way forward. Andy, thanks for your input this morning. That's my little rant
I'm looking
there.
for your soapbox underneath here.
Yeah, it's always there, Angela. It's always there.
He's got a soapbox.
She keeps telling me, stop being a politician and start being a presenter. But I feel really passionate about this because people are paying through the nose. I meet people every single day on the way here, on the way home. They're telling me they're struggling. They're paying all their money on energy. They're getting squeezed dry. And I think it's a terrible lack of planning that's got us into this position.
And we can actually put that into a practical interview now, because although gas prices are falling, that doesn't mean that energy bills are coming down. And experts are warning that 3 in 10 pubs apparently could close this year as they simply can't afford to keep the lights on. And so we're going to meet now someone who is in exactly that position.
And that's Sally Harris, who's the owner of the Gun Inn in West Sussex. Sally, as if it wasn't bad enough during lockdowns when hospitality was thrown under a bus by the government, here we are now, and many pubs across the land are struggling to even be able to afford to keep pubs warm, and it's squeezing the industry dry once again, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, it's incredibly difficult at the moment in terms of the energy bills. Yeah.
Sally, I was looking at the figures that you've supplied us with. Apparently, your electricity bill was £1,500 a month. It's now £4,000 a month. Your gas was £800. It's now £2,500. How the heck are you managing to pay these bills?
I'm not, is the honest answer. I'm behind with a lot of them. We're working really day to day to try and meet those costs and not put that onto the customer, because otherwise you just won't have them. So it's a really fine line. It's balancing plates, and just trying to survive. Really, I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm really busy. I've got a great business.
Yeah, but
just everything apart from the finances.
And it's important to point out, we want to try and not only say well done, but to drum up some trade for you. You were Britain's best pub last year. You're an award-winning pub, and if you're feeling the pinch, then heaven knows how many others are. So, I mean, what are you doing? Are you having to turn the heating off? Are you having to lay off staff? I mean, what kind of difficult choices are you having to make as a publican?
All of those choices, really. I mean, we can't, because we're so busy, we can't afford to lay off any staff, that's for sure. And also in this industry, we're really desperate for staff too. So there's a lot of that going on as well. We are turning things off. We do get really worried when anyone leaves anything on, like the fans. But with running a pub, it's used a huge amount of energy, but the return isn't completely in line with that at the moment.
Is that because many of your customers themselves are actually feeling the pinch and not necessarily turning up as they used to? Bearing in mind that a pub like yours, the Gunner, is sort of a social centre for the local community, isn't it? As well as just a nice place to come and get a pint.
Exactly. I mean, we're so fortunate. People are coming from all over at the moment to come and see the best pub in Britain. So we're really fortunate for that. But and in turn, that is keeping the pub warm, all the bodies in it, so we can switch a few things off.
Yeah, it's interesting because Adam Brooks, who's a regular GBNews contributor, I spoke to him a lot during the lockdown. He's a publican about the terrible position that pubs were in, landlords, often freeholders, have to spend their life savings to tick over, and they really hope, right, here we go, we're open again, the country's up and running, we're supping pints, we're having Sunday lunch. I hope you're fully booked. You're fully booked for today for Sunday lunch?
Oh, we are fully booked today, yeah. We're fully booked like a week in advance at the moment, so make sure you book.
Superb. But so you're doing okay, you're getting by as best you can, but what kind of stories are you hearing from colleagues, friends in the area of those who are really feeling the pinch?
I mean, we are really feeling the pinch, and I do keep in contact with a lot of my friends in the industry, and everybody's struggling. We're all trying to find the best deal that we can. The brewery are quite good in terms of getting me a broker to get that best deal, but they just aren't available at the moment, and you're scared to get locked into something, as you were saying earlier, because you don't know if it's going to go down, and if you get locked into something that's at a higher price. So it's really difficult.
Thank you very much indeed. The landlady at the Gunner, which is Britain's best pub. Yeah,
the Gun in West Sussex.
Yeah.
You're already full, but I mean, obviously times are tough, but let's do all of our very best. Let's make it a national mission to support your local boozer and keep them safe and keep them going on. That's my excuse to go for a nice Sunday lunch today.
Not just your boozer. Support all your local trade to keep them going. Yeah.
Amen to that. Amen to that. OK, let's bring it up to date now with all the rest of today's top stories.
France's president says that he wants to see Russia defeated in Ukraine, but not crushed. Emmanuel Macron says that the West should not aim for a total defeat of Moscow on its own soil. Now, his comments have sparked criticism from some of the other NATO allies, who are saying that what he's doing is delivering mixed messages.
And former US President Jimmy Carter is receiving hospice care at his home in Georgia. A statement from the Carter Center says the 98-year-old made the decision after a series of hospital stays, saying he wants to spend the rest of his remaining time at home with his family.
An anthem written by the composer Andrew Lloyd Webber is one of 12 new pieces of music that's going to be played for King Charles at his coronation in May. Now, the King has requested that he'll also have some Greek Orthodox music played in tribute to his late father, the Duke of Edinburgh. And we've got so much more to come on the programme this morning because we're with you until 9:30. And we're going to be looking, among other things, towards the BAFTAs that happened last night with the lovely Stephanie Tecci. That's going to come up after the break. Stay with us.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. It's 8:26. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Angela and Martin.
Well, it's a busy weekend in the world of showbiz with London Fashion Week ongoing. Also, the prestigious BAFTA Awards being held tonight in South Bank in London. Which films are going to be bringing home the trophies? Well, here to tell us is all the latest news from the BAFTAs is our showbiz reporter, Stephanie Tecci. And Stephanie, once again, I have to say, you got the memo.
This was not planned.
We did it. Sorry, viewers, but yesterday I was wearing a purple jacket and Steffi came in a purple frock. And again today we are like sisters in red.
I think we're style twins, Angela. I think we are. Great minds.
There's a vibe going on there, Steph.
So let's talk York BAFTAs tonight. One of the surprising nominations for this year has been All Quiet on the Western Front. The original film came out in 1930, and this is actually a remake of the remake. But it's managed to sweep up 14 nominations, including costume, best film, casting, editing and cinematography. And it's been played by Felix Kammerer, who's an Austrian actor. I was quite surprised about this film because it's all in German, so the fact that it's managed to connect with all of the jury and audiences at home has been quite surprising. But I'm tipping for this film to sweep up tonight.
And it is the German version of what happened in the First World War, isn't it?
Which is refreshing. Martin, you've seen it, right?
I've seen it twice now. It's astonishing. It's so good. It's not just a war film. It's a story about loss, about bravery, about children being in the most hostile environments. It's a story about sadness, acceptance, historical acceptance of the tragedy and the overwhelming loss of World War One. It's more authentic to me that it's in German.
And with subtitles, which
with subtitles. And I think it's tremendously wonderful, actually, that a German movie about World War One could win the BAFTA.
Surprising. It will definitely be making history, and it's quite poignant as well, because there's always been, the BAFTAs always tend to go for the more Hollywood titles, so this has just literally been a wild card. But it's not the only wild card. We also have the Banshees of Inisherin. This plot, when I heard about it, it's like two male friends who fall out, and I'm like, OK, it sounds interesting. It's got Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, who starred together in Bruges, so they've always had this good on-screen chemistry, which is clearly evident because now they're up for 10 nominations, and people are predicting that Colin Farrell will be winning his first BAFTA in a 25-year career. So that could be amazing. It is.
I've seen lots of clips from it and read so many reviews, and there's a lot of fingers being chopped off.
No, and apparently the Irish haven't been too happy with certain stereotypes of the film.
They're portraying the Irish ostensibly as a little bit backward, and they like to drink a lot. And, you know, that has been sort of chastised.
You've seen the film? I have seen the film, and I thought, like, it gripped me, but again, it was a weird plot. It's not. I don't think it'll be everybody's cup of tea, but Colin Farrell, I think he will pick up leading actor tonight. But he's up against stiff competition from Brendan Fraser for his critically acclaimed performance in The Well, where he plays this morbidly obese teacher who's trying to rectify things with his daughter, so he could actually have a good night. And then we're talking about Austin Butler as well for his performance in Elvis and Baz Luhrmann's. He's up for 9 awards. He done well at the Golden Globes. But then we have English actors who I'm quite happy about, like Bill Nighy. He stars in After Sun, where he's an older man who decides to live life on the edge following a medical diagnosis. Then we have new talent such as Paul Mescal in After Sun. So it's good to have those English names. What I love about the BAFTAs, we haven't got rid of the gendered category, so we will still see things like leading actress. And then we have someone like Cate Blanchett for Tar, who I think she will do really well tonight, but she faces stiff competition from Michelle Yeoh and also Viola Davis. So there's so many names who we're going to be seeing. But what's quite interesting, we'll be seeing the return of the Princess and Prince of Wales, who will be attending, because Prince William, of course, he is the president of the BAFTAs, and they haven't attended in 3 years. So it will be quite a royal affair. We also seen a tribute being paid to the late Queen from the on-screen Queen, Helen Mirren, so that should be a standout performance as well.
Isn't it lovely? Sorry to interrupt you, Martin, but I think you mentioned Bill Nighy there. And what I love about Bill Nighy is that he's sort of come into his own now that he's a mature actor.
And that's what
he's
I'm
been
loving.
around forever. And it's sort of taken the last, 10, 15 years for him to really make an impact, not just on screen, but on radio, on television, everywhere that he's performing.
It just goes to say it's never too late, and he's actually up for his first Oscar as well. So if he doesn't get the BAFTA tonight, maybe he might pick up an Oscar. So it's quite interesting that politics as well, in terms of age, sex, is all going to be represented tonight.
I like the idea of people maturing like a fine wine. And that's why I would like Colin Farrell to win. Farrell has done loads of amazing parts over the years. I'd like to see him get a go.
Definitely, and you know, the reason why it's so good for the actors such as Colin Farrell to be credited with awards is because you never know when his next big film's going to be and whether it'll be the jury's cup of tea. So when you have these moments, it's always good to capitalise on it. But tonight there will be a bit of politics, guys, on fashion statements. Don't be surprised tomorrow if you see some celebrities being pictured with blue ribbons. They'll be helping the UN's agency, UNHCR. They're basically wearing blue ribbons to help all the refugees who've been displaced this year, either through the earthquake or the war in Ukraine. So there will be a tinge of politics tonight.
Are you going?
I'm doing a London Fashion Week show tonight. I had to
turn down my invite, darling.
It was so hard. No. It was so hard, Angela, to pick, but fashion won. But I will be watching, definitely. It's...
Now, quick bit of politics. There's another story here about, is it Roald Dahl?
Yes!
What the heck is going on here?
Gosh, well, clearly... you know, we've seen the woke brigades, as I like to call them. You know, they've been making their way about what terms should be, and it seems like there's going to be a revamp on a few of Roald Dahl's books and terminology in it, such as the witches and all that stuff. But
it's not just the terminology. They've actually changed the storyline. In the witches, there's a line which says, even if she is working as a cashier in a supermarket or typing letters for a businessman, the new edition says, even if she is working as a top scientist or running a business, it's a different character, it's a different story.
I just think leave the classics as they are, especially, like, what a snub to a great author such as Roald Dahl. Like, keep it as it is. If you want to write a separate book, write a separate book, but leave history as it is.
Roald Dahl alone.
Utterly absurd. You're dead right, Stephanie, as usual, and I hope you enjoy your
Thank you so much.
Studded bash.
Will.
Looking wonderful, sounding wonderful, as ever.
Enjoy your show, guys. Take care.
Cheers.
We've got more to come, including all sorts of wonderful stuff in the next hour of the programme, because we're with you. It's 8:33 and we're here until 9:30.
And she might even start singing in a bit.
No, I'm not going to sing. No, you're going to turn the viewers off.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Angela and Martin.
And let's look at today's front pages now.
And we start with The Observer, which is leading with Johnson is threatening Sunak's bid to end the deadlock over Brexit.
Once again, Boris is back. The Independent's front page, the sick children left to suffer as wait for care on the NHS soars.
While The Sun on Sunday goes with Andrew evicted from £30 million mansion.
Yeah, you can hear the smallest violins in the world in the background there, while the Daily Star reports on the rise of alien-related work absences. Now, there's one to conjure with.
Isn't there just? Yes. Can't wait to see what that was all about. Time to go through the papers now, though. But joining us this morning is the deputy editor of Spiked magazine, Fraser Myers, and writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. Candice, we're going to start with you. This is a story that does not go away. It keeps on giving. And it's Nicola Bulley, the amateur investigators now featured in The Sun on Sunday, and what they're up to.
Yeah, so I found this so interesting. So this was on The Sun on Sunday, and it's people in the area which she's from in Lancashire angry at TikTokers who've descended onto the area and have filmed themselves supposedly looking for Nicola digging in the woods. Ugh. And what's so interesting to me is that obviously people are so into true crime these days. There's huge interest on the internet in true crime, and that's why there's been so much interest in the Nicola Bulley story. Some members of the public genuinely want to help, but this is questionable to me. I mean, they're not going to be advancing the investigation in any way. They're not going to find her. I know people have lost faith in the police, but there's something wrong about that, I think.
And I wonder if part of the preponderance of these sleuths, these YouTubers, a couple of whom have been arrested to descend on the area, Fraser, is why the police threw out perhaps too much information about Nicola's background, her struggles with alcoholism and indeed the menopause.
I think the police have failed at every turn. I mean, they've been putting out information that have been, the police have been engaged in a kind of open speculation. They sound like amateur sleuths. Oh, could it be her menopause? Oh, did she fall in a river? Well,
it's been a PR disaster.
It's been a complete disaster. They haven't produced a shred of evidence that could actually lead us to somewhere to finding her. So, although I think it's pretty deplorable people doing things that could potentially tamper with evidence, especially if they're digging things up, it's awful. I do understand people's frustration because the police are not doing their job.
Except that I think we've heard more than one person say that any forensic evidence that might have remained has now probably been destroyed forever, and that again has actually hampered the police.
And that's a real problem. But also, I mean, the fact that she's been gone missing for as long as she has now, the likelihood of her being found is so slim.
Now, Candice, if I may assume you're a woman, it is 2023 after all.
Dare you?
Yeah, although you did admit earlier in the show to being a mother, so you can't shoot me down for that.
Yeah.
How does it make you feel about the police releasing evidence? I think that the internet's forever, and her poor children, whatever happens...
Different story.
To Nicola. No, it's not. About Nicola Bulley.
Oh, about Nicola Bulley.
I want to stay on that because that information is forever, and I think it's another erosion of kind of women's rights and their kind of their bodies just being used as a news story.
Yes, because the police never quite connected the two, right? So they said she had problems with alcohol, she'd been struggling with the menopause, but they didn't say, well, she was drunk and she fell in the river, or she was having some sort of personal crisis and maybe she harmed herself.
Yeah.
They sort of just put it out there and insinuated something, which I think is hugely damaging.
Yeah.
And they didn't apparently clear it with the family beforehand. Which is pretty awful. My apologies, Martin. It's just that I saw a trans kid clinic round. I thought that's the story you were going on to, which is the one that Fraser wants to talk about.
Yeah, so it turns out that children in the United Kingdom are still being prescribed puberty-blocking drugs. This is despite the fact that there isn't really any clinical evidence to say that they're doing any good. Quite the opposite, in fact. The Tavistock, when it did the Tavistock Clinic, which is where the UK's sort of specialist gender ID clinic, which is due to be closed this summer. They actually did their own little investigation into this. They said publicly it had gone really well. They buried the evidence. In fact, what it showed was that it wasn't helping children with gender dysphoria. It was, in many cases, it was making it worse. It was making people feel even more alienated from their bodies. And yet this drug is still being prescribed to children. Interestingly, so the drug is called Lupron. It's prescribed off-label, so it's given to people who normally for people who have prostate cancer. That's kind of its main medical use. Its other use is what they give to sex offenders.
So it's a testosterone blocker.
It's a testosterone suppressant, and it's what they give. They give the same dose to children to block their puberty as they give to sex offenders when they want to chemically castrate them. You know, that's pretty dark. I think that's a big scandal. People within the Tavistock have said that this, the medicalisation of children, particularly many of them gay, many of them autistic, they've said it's a scandal on a par with the East German doping of athletes, and I think it is, you know, at that level. There seems to be this kind of ideological aversion to really saying, actually, do we know anything about this drug? What are the harms? What are the side effects? Because, you know, if you speak out against that, then you're seen as being anti-trans or being transphobic.
I wonder if, Candice, bringing you into this one, I wonder if we are seeing a turning point, an awakening about this sort of stuff, because Tavistock now is in full glare. The Times and the Sunday Times, credit to them, they've led this campaign of shining sunlight on as the best form of bleach to expose us. We're now seeing that sturgeon's been brought down. We covered this earlier in Scotland. Is there signs of hope that common sense might be taking over? Or are we still stuck in the mire?
I think common sense is taking over, and I'm glad that scrutiny is being applied to this. They should not be prescribing this to children. After the Cass review, she categorically said, we do not know the long-term effects of this medicine and what it's doing. It needs to stop now until further research is carried out.
Yeah. Well, to a story now that you've picked out from the Sunday Times that we were actually just sort of headlining just now when we were talking to Stephanie Tecci about the ruining of Roald Dahl's stories. What are they doing to them?
No, this is... I think this makes people angry because Roald Dahl is such a beloved author. This was a story in the Sunday Times.
Great headline.
Yes, Charlie and the Censorship Factory, because it really, really is, right? So they're bringing in these so-called sensitivity readers to figure out what parts of Roald Dahl could be offensive and changing the language. But I think you said earlier, they're not just changing the language, it's changing the story.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, so The Witches, for instance, there's a piece in there that defends women who might wear wigs. When we all know in The Witches, like, a big part of it is that they're bald, right? And they're so scary. And what is that teaching kids? That you can't question adults? That you can't make fun of mean adults?
Should we read what it says?
Yes.
The original edition, or the 2001 edition, don't be foolish, my grandmother said. You can't go around pulling the hair of every lady you meet, even if she is wearing gloves. Just try it and see what happens. 2022, it says...
Don't be foolish, my grandmother said. Besides, there are plenty of other reasons why women might wear wigs, and there is certainly nothing wrong with that.
It's a different story.
It is a different story.
Augustus Gloop is no longer fat as well.
No.
And Miss Truncheon is no longer referred to as female. You know, what's funny is that Roald Dahl is known to be an anti-Semite, but there's nothing racist in his books. And normally, a lot of these controversies, you know, used to 10 years ago, you'd have a row and there'd be some hangover of racist language in a children's book, and I would defend, you know, keeping with the original. But you'd see that there was a kind of a legitimate complaint. Do we want to give, you know... Is this language appropriate for children? Here, there's none of that. It's words like double chin are being censored, words like fat. Who do these sort of sensitivity readers think they are?
Very sensitive individuals.
They're very, very sensitive. Much more sensitive than the general public. They're much more sensitive than children, because children love these books.
I know.
Yeah, and we should read these sensitivity readers, the Riot Act, and just clear them out. You know, what's wrong with being politically incorrect? And then you can have a chat with your kids. Well, actually, is it not appropriate? My son got into trouble at school for using a word. I'll say it. He used the word retarded because it was in a Google search he did about mental conditions around Down syndrome. That's an outmoded word.
Yeah.
He read it out in the classroom and he got in trouble for it. And he came in very upset. And I said, well, it is a word that's inappropriate. We can learn from that and don't repeat mistakes. But you don't do that by censoring words out of existence. That's me on my soapbox once again. Sorry.
That's all right. He's got one underneath.
It's really important to say that this is, this is the death of literature.
Yeah.
If you're going to scrub all offensive remarks out of books. I mean, we're lucky, I suppose, that we get to see, we can compare and contrast the original with this new horrible censored version. A lot of books, this is happening pre-publication. You know, we don't even get to see what is going on behind the scenes, what's being torn up, what's being censored. And, you know, as Ray Bradbury said, there's more than one way to burn a book, and there's a lot of people running around with lit matches. And this is a great example of that. It's really very scary.
Oh, yeah, just read the story, because I think it'll frighten the life out of you, what they
Now,
want
there's
to do.
one that really close to my heart. We've got quick time for this. It's in the Sunday Telegraph. There's a rebellion over Sadiq Khan's expansion of the ULEZ £12.50 a day to drive scheme. The Tories are on the warpath. What's happening, Fraser?
So, Number 10 is considering blocking the expansion of it, because it's at the moment it only applies to central London, and it's going to apply to...
There are other cities in Britain where they're doing something very similar.
But Sadiq Khan wants to expand it to outer London.
Correct.
Which is pretty outrageous. I mean, I live in Zone 2, so I'm not really affected by it. I can get public transport. But, you know, if you live in outer London, there's not really many public transport options. What if you have a trade? You know, and also, shouldn't people just have the right to drive? Isn't that a normal thing?
With people, what ULEZ is to those people who don't understand.
OK, so people don't know. It's the ultra-low emission zone, and it means that you'll face a charge every day if you drive in that zone, which is basically going to be the whole of Greater London. If your car is basically too old and therefore not eco-friendly enough.
It's £12.50.
And it's £12.50 a go. And obviously, it's people with older cars are poorer. It's people who can't afford to pay this charge.
And the specific case they may have, which I think is a great line of attack, is that because it's now expanded to all of London, there's a £5 charge to come in from outside of London. So the mayor has overreached his powers and he's going out of London, and I think they've got a good case. And anyway, it'd be a great fight to watch in the courts, won't it?
Definitely, it's got to be hit back. This.
Yeah, and he just wants to make lots of money out of motorists so that he can pay off the deficit for all the money that he's wasted on London transport.
OK, good. Well, thank you once again, Candice and Fraser. A tremendously lively part of the show. And let's bring you up to date with what's going on today in the rest of the news.
Boris Johnson has warned Rishi Sunak that dropping the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill would be a great mistake. Now, the agreement was set in motion by Mr Johnson when he was Prime Minister, but government says a successful outcome of recent talks would mean that the Protocol Bill would no longer be needed.
As Scottish Health Secretary Humza Yousaf and former Minister Ash Regan have become the first to announce their running to replace Nicola Sturgeon as the SNP's leader. Other candidates tipped to stand for election are Finance Minister Kate Forbes and Deputy Leader Keith Brown.
An Iranian TV channel based in the UK says that it has been forced to move to the United States over safety fears for its journalists. Iran International Television says it has reluctantly closed its West London studios, but staff refused to be silenced by threats from Tehran. The government responded by condemning the lack of respect for basic rights from the Iranian regime.
And I need to make an apology for a word I used in the newspaper review there, and I was making the point that my son used that word and had to apologise. I used the word to exemplify the story, and in doing so, I was offensive. Sorry, I was making the point. It came up in a Google search about something, and he repeated it without understanding it was an inappropriate word, and now I've made the same mistake. Sorry if it upset your feelings. OK.
Now, for those of you with a young family, how much does childcare cost you per week?
Well, the answer is a lot, and 1 in 5 parents pay between £800 to £1,200 a month. And concerning new figures reveal that almost half of parents say their providers increased their fees in the last 6 months.
Well, we're going to talk now to the head of money at Plum, Rajan Lakhani. Rajan, I'm aware of something which is called the tax-free childcare scheme, which gives parents up to £2,000 a year. But apparently, there is something like £15 billion of this that has never been claimed. Is this all suggesting that actually there is help out there for parents with young children, but it's so difficult to access and so difficult to hear about that people just don't know about it?
Well, yeah, that's one of the challenges I think that parents are facing, is that the system of childcare is really, really complex and complicated. I've done a number of comments in the press for exactly that reason, to highlight the fact that there is this support available to parents. But more fundamentally, the charges for childcare are going up hugely. Britain has the third highest charges for childcare among the major nations. And people are paying ever more on childcare, and there are a broad range of reasons for that. For example, the prices on properties are going up, so the rental charges are going up. Like all of us, they've had to pay more on energy bills as well. Taxes have gone up, so they're having to pay more for national insurance. Also, government support as well. It is a challenge because the cost of childcare is growing, yet the money that comes from government isn't quite enough to pay for those free hours.
Yeah, I remember well, when I had my first child, I basically was spending most of my salary on childcare in London, and I thought long and hard about having a second child. And you're hearing that as well, aren't you? Childcare is literally putting people off having children at all.
Absolutely. So we commissioned this research, so Plum's a smart money app, and we're there to help people manage their money. And we do it differently because we help people automate their finances, so they don't have to necessarily take all the actions themselves, but remain in control of them. And we commissioned this research because we're seeing that their financial resilience is being hurt by childcare, and they're having to make some desperate choices, and one of which, as you rightly highlighted, is having to put off having a child or not having a child at all. 2/3 of the people in our survey said exactly that. And they're having to make other kind of desperate choices as well. For example, 1/3 of them are having to cut back on everyday groceries. And worryingly also, especially as we're a money management app, we've seen that people are having to cut back on savings and investments. So that everyday money that they need to grow their financial resilience is being damaged.
And in fact, there's a greater problem here, isn't there, because of the effect that all of this is having on the economy in general, where parents are deciding, you know, do we go back to work?
Yeah.
Do we bolster our income, or do we just stay at home and look after the children?
You're absolutely right. And I think this is a way for the government to actually support the economy. You'll hear from Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, and they'll be saying inflation is the big challenge at the moment, facing all of us. And how do you tackle inflation? Well, one of the challenges is people's wages have been rising because there's less workers, and so demand is higher. So one of the ways they can tackle it is getting more people into work, as you say, and that's important not only for the economy but for people as well.
So you're taking action on this at Plum. You've written an open letter to the Prime Minister. Can you tell us a bit about who's co-signed it, which experts, and also what are you asking for?
Yeah, exactly. So we've got some really established institutions that have signed up to it. For example, the National Day Nurses Association. We've got the London Early Years Foundation that signed up, the Fatherhood Institute as well, and the Mother Lode as well. So we've got some really big institutions that are on board as well. And we're calling for a few things from the government, one of which is to make the system of childcare a lot more simple, so parents can access it more, expanding the number of hours of childcare, because once you hit 1 or 2 years of age, that free childcare cuts off until 3 or 4. So expanding the number of hours, but also helping businesses as well, you know, whether it's through tax breaks and encouraging them to provide more childcare services within organisations as well.
But releasing some of that $15 billion, which is just sitting in a pot somewhere at the moment, and if it is not being given to parents, it's going to go back into the National Exchequer, and it'll be lost to those parents forever, won't it?
Exactly, and I think the government can do more to communicate exactly what services are available, what tax breaks are available to parents, and services like Plum and organisations that I mentioned before will also do our best in communicating what benefits are available to parents.
And of course there'll be cynics out there going, well, if you can't afford to have children, don't have them. But of course it's not as simple as that, because I mean you just don't have any idea of how expensive it is until you kind of get in there, and it's eye-watering. I mean, it means no holidays, no luxuries. It means literally put your kids in care and then just sort of survive.
Exactly. You know, the costs are huge, and as you pointed out earlier, 20% of people are paying £800 to £1,200 a month. In London, you're probably paying £1,500 a month. And, you know, children so important in terms of just, life and also actually think about it for the economy. You need more people coming through to pay as well.
Rajan, thank you very much indeed for that. And I hope that people will actually go onto the government website and find out whether or not they can get access to that money.
OK, more to come after the break. Please stay with us.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Boris Johnson warns that ditching the Northern Ireland Protocol would be a great mistake.
And top of the morning, it's 9 o'clock on Sunday the 19th of February. This is Brexit on GB News with Angela Rippon and myself, Martin Dorbin. Here are your top stories this morning.
Well, as we just said, Boris Johnson is on a collision course with Downing Street over the Northern Ireland Protocol. In his first intervention since leaving Number 10, the former Prime Minister has issued a stark warning over plans to abandon the bill.
Also in the news, the UK will support allies who have fighter jets ready to hand over to Ukraine. Speaking in Germany, Rishi Sunak says Kyiv has been failed by the West's security guarantees following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
The race to replace Nicola Sturgeon is heating up, with the Scottish Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, and the former Minister Ash Regan throwing their hats into the ring to become the next SNP leader and Scotland's First Minister.
And King Charles's coronation will feature 12 newly commissioned pieces of music, including an anthem by award-winning composer Lord Andrew Webber.
As ever, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnewsuk. And we have got a bit of a musical treat for you at the end of this half hour, because we're going to be listening to some of that music that has been commissioned.
And you said you'd sing earlier on.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No.
Yes, you did.
No, every viewer will turn off immediately if I start singing. I can promise you. That's not something I would impose on anybody at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. Well, Rishi Sunak's efforts to break the impasse over the Northern Ireland Protocol have been dealt a really major blow by Boris Johnson.
Yeah, Boris is back. The former Prime Minister says dropping the deal, which would empower the UK to unilaterally scrap part of the treaty, would be a great mistake.
Now, his comments come after Mr Sunak said yesterday that a deal is by no means done.
Yeah,
so let's get some thoughts from political correspondent Peter Spencer, because we know that the deal has not been done yet, but Boris throwing his hat in the ring there, he's trying to go after the leadership again, isn't he?
He most certainly is. I mean, there's no question about it. If you look at the Tory party now, it once used to be this broad church, beautifully united. It's now a loose confederation of warring tribes, for heaven's sake. I mean, there is a caucus that wants to hold a conference just after the May local elections, at which the Tories are expected to be totally shafted, and so that is one sort of central piece. That's one plank of because their central tenet is they want to get Boris back. So what he's done now is, he's said, look, oi, this was my oven-ready deal. All we had to do was to pop it in the microwave. Well, I don't know about you guys, but if I pop the wrong things into my microwave, it fizzes and pops and threatens to blow up. Precisely so, which is exactly what we've seen in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because Boris does have a point, though, and the specific line of battle here is about the NI Protocol Bill. Clause 20 specifically leaves on the table the ability of the UK to say to the EU, oi, no, we are not having any European Court of Justice control in Northern Ireland. We still have that veto at the moment. If Rishi does drop that, it does somewhat open the door to Brussels. So Brexiteers will say Boris has got a point.
Brexiteers, well, they're already saying it, for heaven's sake. I mean,
I've got one sitting next to me. So.
Well, precisely so. But we'll agree. Whatevs. I mean, there is a large caucus within the Conservative Party which does indeed, which is, you know, the so-called Spartans that David Cameron used to refer to as the swivel-eyed loons, a piece of ill-judged hubris, it has to be said, because they had the last laugh on him, did they not? But I think that Boris is hitting fairly fertile ground here. I mean, you know, there's the 20 or so real hardcore Brexiteers within the Parliamentary Party, but there's a very much larger swathe. And in my judgment, Rishi Sunak is pushing at a less closed door in Northern Ireland than he is in Westminster, because in Northern Ireland, of course, the DUP want to go back to government. I mean, who wouldn't, for heaven's sake? Whereas that the hardcore Brexiteers and their outriders in Parliament, they haven't got anything particularly to gain. They just want to make good and sure that Brussels does not get its nose does not get its snout into the trough. But I mean, what Sunak is trying to do is to, OK, the European Court of Justice does have a say, but it's very, very much a long stop. Yeah. And that might be enough to tip the DUP over the edge. When it comes to Parliament, all bets are off.
Yeah, but as we've been saying earlier on the programme today, it is all a bit of a mess, actually, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
Let's turn to Ukraine now, because we've got Rishi Sunak and a lot of other world leaders having met in Germany. The rhetoric there has ratcheted up, hasn't it? But I did read somewhere that someone said that they think the only way that we are going to end this war is if we can change public opinion in Russia. But that is pretty much whistling in the wind, isn't it? Because when you think of the control that state media has on the news and attitudes in Russia, That's not going to happen in a heartbeat, is it?
No, it is not. I mean, you know...
But do you think that would be the solution?
Well, I think it probably would. It would tilt it because, I mean, Putin he started off as actually quite a sensible bloke years ago, but he's got more and more into his own little vortex, and he's surrounded by fewer and fewer people and essentially yes men, and so he sort of is still deluded into thinking he can do these things. But his propaganda, sure. I mean, it's on par with what we saw in Germany in the 1930s, when you know the zeitgeist was such that, you know, Jews are awful and, you know, Germany will be great and blah blah blah, and that's what's going on there. And also, you've got to trace the history of Russia, where there is, you know, they're not very good on democracy. The only thing that could tilt it, however, is you get enough visible body bags back in Russia. And, of course, the economy has been completely bashed to smithereens thanks to the sanctions. Maybe if people start to feel, hang on a minute, what's this for? Rather more furious mothers.
It's interesting, Peter, how politicians look like action men on the world stage. I've got Rishi trying to out, you know, macho Boris with his helicopter hat. £2.1 billion, however, were chucked Ukraine's way last year, with now talk about doubling down with jets. Do you think the public will is still there to spend those sums of money on a war far away, ostensibly? As when we look at this week, figures out that now we are behind France in NATO's rankings of our ability to defend our own country.
Absolutely right. I mean, of course, you've got to remember there is a budget coming up, and the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, is very energetically campaigning to make the Defence Department a special case. I mean, all the ministers do that. There's always a bidding war. But in this case, yeah, defence does loom pretty large. And you've got his outriders, senior military figures, who are saying, look, we actually, as you rightly say, we can't even defend ourselves. But I suspect that there is still that sufficient groundswell of opinion within British opinion and indeed across the West that Russia really does pose an existential threat. Going back to Rishi Sunak, most certainly with Northern Ireland and Ukraine. I mean, he's been whirling around like a dervish with naughty stuff up his nose, hasn't he?
Peter, thank you very much indeed for that. A pleasure to have you in the studio, as always.
OK, now to Scotland. And as the race to replace Nicola Sturgeon sees SNP candidates declaring, Labour's leader Keir Starmer will be delivering a televised address to the conference at midday today.
So let's head over to Edinburgh, where our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire is waiting for us. Tony, what are we expecting the leader to say?
Well, yes, today you would think with the hype surrounding this third day of the conference that it was Keir Hardie appearing here, not Keir Starmer. But certainly we did get a sneak peek at some of the topics that the Labour leader is bringing to the conference today. Certainly, as we saw Anna Sarwar do on Friday, he's going to make a direct appeal again to the Scots who, you know, feel like under, what are we on now, about 13 years under Conservative rule in Westminster, feel that independence is the only way out. He's going to talk about his childhood and his working class background, hoping to obviously appeal to a wider range of Scots. And then also we know that he's going to talk a little bit about his history of being able to reform organisations, and hopefully that is going to be a sign for a lot of Scots, I would reckon, in his opinion, that Labour is now a new valid choice. Of course, in the last general election, 2019, Labour unfortunately only had one seat north of the border, and that is Ian Murray in Edinburgh South. And Ian Murray will be hoping for quite a few new colleagues to be joining him on the benches of Westminster come the next general election. Of course, Edinburgh at the minute, if New York is the city that never sleeps, Edinburgh is the city that never stops politicking. With the First Minister's resignation midweek, we're now starting to see the runners and riders break the surface. The first two being Ash Regan, former minister, of course, quite for want of a better word, infamous in the last few months for opposing Nicola Sturgeon on things such as the gender bill. But so it'll be an interesting day here in Edinburgh.
Thanks very much indeed for that. Well, let's bring you up to date on the other stories that are happening today. An Iranian TV channel based in the UK says that it has been forced to move to the United States over safety fears for its journalists. The station is Iran International TV, and it says it's reluctantly closed its West London studios, but the staff refuse to be silenced by threats from Tehran, whilst the government is reportedly saying that they are condemning the lack of respect for basic rights that has come from the Iranian regime.
And the US Secretary of State has had a meeting with China's top diplomat. Antony Blinken met with Wang Yi in Munich last night. It follows comments Yi made towards the US early today, saying it's violating international norms with what he describes as hysterical behaviour as tensions have continued following Chinese spy balloons being flown over the US and Canada. The State Department spokesperson says during the meeting, Blinken made clear such an occurrence must never happen again.
Being a bit previous there to tell you about an alarming new poll that has found that nearly half of Britain believe that they would be financially better off and have a better quality of life if they lived abroad.
Yeah, but it was a shame that. Stay here, make Britain better. Anyhow, the research by CSJ found 75% of you said the country is broken and they didn't trust politicians from either party, so none of them at all, to be able to comprehensively tackle poverty.
Well, let's speak to former Conservative Party leader and Cabinet Minister Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. Good morning to you, Sir Ian. I know that you've had an opportunity to look at this report. What do you make of it? Is there any hope at all for us here in Britain?
Well, to be fair, actually, it's my report, so I would have looked at it with the Centre for Social Justice I set up some years ago to produce this. And this is a start to a proper inquiry, including people like Lord King, the ex-Governor of the Bank of England, into what has happened over the last 10 or so years following the original banking crash and then the huge blow of COVID and the huge expense and cost and the damage to people's lives. Those polls are about how people feel now coming out of COVID with a problem over the economy and recession and the amount of money that was spent during that process. And of course, it's quite interesting in the report you will see that we're going to look at more carefully is that children in the lowest income groups, some of them in really quite difficult situations, they were already about a year and a half behind when they first entered education. And they're now over 2 years behind because the COVID damage that was done to them, the failure to be able to get them into school or to continue with their education, has significantly damaged many of those children. So it's an attempt to look at those areas where people recognize now that their quality of life has gone backwards. And that is hugely, we underestimate the terrible negative effect of the lockdowns during COVID and the damage that's been done, particularly, say, those in the poorest circumstances.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I can vouch for that. I've seen that in my school where my missus teachers, and oftentimes it was the most impoverished, those already the first behind that were dropping out of education. So a chance to fight back is supreme. And you've been fighting on this for a long time, haven't you?
I have indeed. I set up the Centre for Social Justice, which is the purpose of which is not just to look at our people poor in financial terms, it's to try and get to the root causes of why they're unable to navigate their lives financially. So things like family breakdown, failed education, debt, huge issues, worklessness, all those sort of areas are really, really the key cause why people find themselves in this situation. So going back to the roots and put those things right as quickly as we can, hence the huge focus on this body blow of COVID that is all the advances that were made have all gone backwards now as a result. That's why people feel dissatisfied with their lot. I suspect actually that if we went to many of those countries that people are thinking that they might be better off and they did a poll, most of them would be thinking almost exactly the same, that they were fed up with their lives. We just underestimate the blow of COVID, the damage that has been done to society and the costs to government.
What I think is interesting is that one of the questions you asked is about the Conservatives' general approach to tackling poverty and the Labour Party's approach to tackling poverty, and the public reaction was exactly the same words. They all said they were useless, rubbish, uncaring, bad, and unrealistic. So presumably we think that actually nobody is getting it right for the country at the moment.
Well, I think this is a warning sign to all of politics. We take a lot of time chewing bits off each other and arguing across the dispatch box and the floor of the House of Commons and hurling, accusations at each other. But the truth is, the public is a million miles away from this. That's what we're finding. What they want is practical solutions, things that they know they can see that actually help them improve the quality of their lives. That is the key. And we should be clearing the decks to do just that. And that problem was there already, but it's got so much worse now directly as a result of the COVID lockdowns that we now need, in a way, to recognize that having attacks on each other on personal bases or accusing each of the other of not doing it doesn't really work. What the public want is actually solutions and key solutions to change their lives. And that's what this commission is going to be looking at. As I said, it has lots of key people in it, including the ex-governor of the Bank of England, Lord King, who's very clear about the lack of productivity, the lack of growth, which has affected families over a long period now, going back from the time of the big crash, the banking crash. So all of those very influential people will be looking at this, try and figure out what it is that governments, no matter who they are, will actually be able to do as they have power.
OK, so Ian, if nobody at present can handle this, one name that's hove into view again today is Boris Johnson. Is it Boris Johnson best for the country? A comeback?
I don't think, forgive me, I don't think people, individuals and personnel are the key point here. I think what's important is for politicians to actually recognise the problem needs key practical solutions, sort of the stuff that we've talked about. Take family breakdown across the UK at the highest levels it's been. That costs on average around 50 to 60 billion pounds a year to taxpayers. It's astonishing that we haven't figured that out earlier. The reality is these areas need solutions. So whether it's Boris or anybody else for that matter, the key thing right now, the present, our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, I think does get the problem here. And I've talked to him at length about it. He wants to resolve it. But what he needs to do is to make sure that we don't make it worse, first of all, in the weeks and months coming. And that what we now look to do is to sort of settle this and do practical things. I said those 5 pathways I gave out, they're the key. Start tackling those and you'll start getting society back into order.
So, Ian, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I think that will give our viewers a lot of thought.
Yes, thank you for that.
We've got an awful lot more to come this morning, including a look ahead to some of the music that we can expect and hear at the King's Coronation. So stay tuned.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Martin and Angela.
Now, 12 newly commissioned pieces of music are going to be performed at the coronation of the King and the Queen Consort. They're going to form a key part of this ceremony, and I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Rafe Hadel-Manku, who's going to tell us all about this music. There are going to be 6 new orchestral pieces, 5 choral pieces, 1 new organ piece. It's going to be a feast of music,
It's going to be glorious, you know. I mean, every coronation always combines historic pieces with new commissions. The Queen had 40 pieces of music in her coronation, 9 of which were new commissions. But remarkably, even though the King's coronation is far shorter, he's actually got 12 new commissions. And this is really, I think, to show that he really supports British culture, British music. He's patron of a huge number of choirs and of orchestras. And I think this really is himself showing his own real, genuine passion. I don't think any king, since possibly Hanoverian times, has had such a deep passion for classical music. Now, when the Queen was around, she came at the tail end of a golden age of British classical music. So she could choose Ralph Vaughan Williams, Sir William Walton, Arnold Bax, Arthur Bliss, great composers. Today's world is a lot different in terms of classical music, and so we have people like Andrew Lloyd Webber being chosen to compose the Coronation Anthem, which will put him up there in the ranks of Handel, who composed the most famous Coronation Anthem of all, Zadok the Priest.
Yes.
Patrick Doyle.
But that's going to be in it, though, isn't it? Zadok the Priest
That's
is
been
still
performed
there?
at every
Yes.
coronation since 1727,
Yeah.
King George II's coronation, just before the anointing that takes place, as is the Vivat sung by the boys of Westminster College.
Glorious.
Will always be there.
Glorious.
And we expect Hubert Parry's I Was Glad, which was a glorious piece performed for the Queen as well, and King Charles loves that. So we know that that's definitely going to be in there too. And Patrick Doyle, Scottish film composer, famous for Harry Potter and for Thor, films like that. He'll be doing the Coronation March, which will put him in the ranks of Elgar, who did, of course, the famous 4 Pomp and Circumstance marches, one better known as Land of Hope and Glory. And then we're going to have a lot of ethnic diversity and women. We're the first female and ethnic minority composers will be there. We've got the Master of the King's Music, Judith Weir, the Composer-in-Chief of Classic FM, Debbie Wiseman there. So a very, very different type of music will be performed there, but still a glorious occasion, I think. We can all, after that last story about how dreary and glum Britain is, something to warm the cockles of British hearts, I think.
And a real Commonwealth flavour as well, because building bridges with the Commonwealth, a huge part of Britain's future and a post-Brexit landscape. One final mention of Brexit in the show. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. There's going to be an organ piece which will absolutely reflect different parts of the Commonwealth. The King, of course, reminding people that he's not just being crowned King of Britain. He will take the oath to govern the peoples of Canada and Australia, New Zealand, etc., etc.
Yes, and I think we should also mention, which I think is lovely, that there's going to be the Byzantine Chant Ensemble, who are going to sing Greek music as a tribute to his father, of course, the late Duke of Edinburgh, who was a Greek prince.
That's right, and not to be forgotten, some people thought there might be some multi-faith music, some Buddhist chanting. No, it doesn't seem to be the case, but there will be Greek Orthodox chanting, reflecting Prince Philip's origins, but also, of course, the King's grandmother, Prince Philip's mother, was a nun in the Greek Orthodox Church, and through her, he developed a really strong interest, a lifelong interest, I should say, in the Greek Orthodox Church.
And we're seeing images on the screen there, which I'm sure will add to that feeling, Rafe, of warming the cockles.
It's from the wedding, of course.
Yeah, both sadly missed.
Yes.
And a great moment to mark the new coronation. Looking forward to that. I'm sure everybody is at home.
I think, as we said at the beginning, it is going to be a feast of music over the, it was 4 hours, the Queen's coronation, wasn't it?
It was just over 3 hours.
3 hours.
This is going to be much shorter. But, of course, music either side also of the coronation service before and after.
Yes.
And there'll be a big concert the next day as well with many, many famous faces.
Thank you, Rafe. You've certainly warmed us up this morning.
Yes.
That's it from us, but please stay tuned because up next, it's the Camilla Tominey Show.
You have a good day.
Thank you.